This project kind of deserves a proper introduction. In 2007, I was disenchanted with the Fallout series. It's a series I love dearly. I've been playing the games since about 2012. And unfortunately, Fallout 4 just didn't do it for me. There were a lot of reasons, but in 2017, I kind of wanted to know more about those reasons. They felt kind of esoteric and hard to define in my head. Aside from the frame rate being bad. It was bad. And so, I started writing a script. It is now 2020, and while I haven't been writing the script for 3 years straight, I have been focusing heavily on this script all year long. Come with me on a 5-part, 2.5-hour long, Jesus Christ, what have I done with my life, adventure into the world of Fallout, its themes, and its gameplay gestalts. Fallout is more than just that open-world gun-shooty game that Bethesda makes, what with the old people music and such. Fallout is not only a post-nuclear role-playing game from the DOS days, it's a reflection of who we are as Americans, and how what we do worldwide is perceived by the rest of the world, and by people who are paying attention. Fallout is a game with political connotations, with militaristic connotations, with capitalistic connotations. And to explore those and learn more about Fallout through these, we might learn something about who we are as a nation and where we are headed. If all of this seems esoteric or stupid, I implore you to at least watch some of this video. Every piece of media is at least a little political, even those who bear no political message whatsoever. The fact that they can stay neutral is a political stance. But Fallout isn't just a game that stays neutral. It's a game with very specific roots and very specific deviations from those roots over the years. So let's not just talk about Fallout, but let's analyze Fallout. Welcome to Fallout in Analysis. Fallout has humble beginnings. Originally a sequel to Electronic Arts' Wasteland before becoming its own thing, Fallout is a turn-based isometric RPG where the player has spent their whole life in a vault, deep underground. They head out to secure a water chip, because without it the vault's water supply will run out, and along the way the player comes across sparse villages in the post-apocalyptic deserts of California. Vaults containing sealed-off remnants of a time before the war, much like your own vault, and camps of raiders, mutants, and freaks of all kinds. Fallout opens shockingly strong. We watch some ads on TV, first reminding us to book our place in the local vault. We watch American soldiers execute a Canadian prisoner, or a civilian, or a protester. We're asked to buy war bonds, and then we see an ad for a fully analog hydrogen-powered car, whose price kinda just looks like how the current financial crisis looks to people about my age, complete with it only to really bring it all home. This opening scene is short and sweet, and outside of some narration by Ron Perlman, is incredibly low budget. Stock photos of World War II and a very stiff, clunky CG cutscene of a single area with no moving characters, apart from what's on the screen. Despite its simplicity, this opening cutscene provides us with everything we need to know about pre-war America. Money was useless. America's imperialism had hit an all-time high, and everyone was kind of just waiting for the end of the world, feeling confident that America was somehow still on top despite all this. It's a bleak existence, told in a single panning shot. There's just so much you can talk about with it, from the celebration of war mirroring a fascist state or Italian futurism, to the destruction of the American economy, and all of this strife was for nothing. None of what America fought for meant anything in the end. It's all ruins to be picked through and evaluated, like an archaeological dig. Fallouts 1 and 2 are turn-based role-playing games with, we'll call them, strategy elements. Players can walk a limited distance based on their agility special stat on each turn, and attacking any enemy costs action points, but they can decide where to attack. Shots to the head might deal more damage, but their chances of success are lower than if you were to aim at center of mass. You could get closer, but then you risk throwing yourself into enemy fire or melee range. And because, overall, your health and ammo are rather scarce resources, and you're constantly fighting against your carry limit, you're constantly having to analyze your environment and make quick decisions about where, when, and how you're fighting enemies. But often, you don't even need to fight. Combat isn't all you do in Fallout. Actually, in tabletop RPG fashion, you're able to complete the entire campaign without killing anyone. Stealth is a skill that, when paired with solid environmental awareness, lets players traverse an area and get out of random encounters without ever taking damage. And in settlements or against the game's bosses, players can use their vast array of skills to pass various checks to skip having to fight. A high charisma stat and speech skill let you persuade enemies into not attacking. A past science or medicine check lets you hand vital information to allies without needing to go halfway across California to track down answers. And strength as well as weapon skills can be used to intimidate opponents and blow them out of there if they don't quite work out like how you want them to. And if that's all too much to handle, then simply pickpocket the enemy to take a vital key, or pass, and drop a grenade in their pocket while you're there. What makes the Fallout RPGs so compelling even 20 years later is how well these games can capture the gestalts of the wasteland. I've used gestalt a bunch in relation to games before, and this video is pretty much entirely about gestalts. For the uninitiated, a gestalt in relation to games is best described as follows. Strip away all context and justification. What are you doing? For reference, American McGee's Grimm is a terrible game, and a large part of its awfulness is in how badly its gestalt clashes with its story. You play as one of the brothers Grimm, trying to bring chaos and death to old fairy tales. You'd expect to run around harassing people, tearing stuff apart, just sprinting wherever your terrible little heart takes you. But no. You have to rather systematically scrub an area of goodliness, as leaving gaps can set you back, in much the same way Mario scrubs an area of pollution, and patches if it can spawn enemies. Your gestalt is one of cleaning, of cleansing, of making sure you don't miss a spot. Systematically tracking down every single polygon and pixel on the screen to make sure you can move on safely. This ordered gameplay clashes with the idea that this brings chaos, and it makes the game feel cheap. And it is cheap. But what do you expect from the guy who gave us the Crusher in Doom 2? Segue over. So when I say that Fallout works so well because of its gestalts, it's because the actions and reactions a player has to commit to match those of someone who's actually in a constant life or death apocalyptic scenario pretty perfectly. You're constantly having to survey your environment for ways in and out of combat. You're counting your shots. When you're running low on ammo, you have to quickly come up with a backup plan. Of course, you technically get all the time in the world to come up with a plan. You can just take your time before you make any moves on your turn. But your limited resources and the time crunch make sure that there's always pressure to survive the best you can out in the wastes. And Fallout does an excellent job at pulling no punches. And above all, while so much of the game relies on luck, on random numbers, your skills come to the rescue constantly to ensure that you can walk away from a raider encounter instead of having to be mailed back to Vault 13 in a discarded beer bottle. Fallout 2 continues everything the previous game had done. It is effectively what Black Isle had wanted to create in the first place, now given an extra year to spruce up. Fallout 2 recycles a large number of assets from the first game, including its roots in Vault 13. However, society inside the vault has completely collapsed, and many have followed in the original player's footsteps to explore the outside world. Those dwellers founded a village to the north, and eventually Vault 13 became a holy site to those people. That village rose in power over the 2170s and 2180s, and the Vault Dweller's story was passed down from dweller to daughter, then to son, and the tribe of Arroyo is stuck in the worst drought Northern California has seen in centuries. The tribe believes that the Garden of Eden creation kit, a piece of technology sold to Vault Dwellers before the war, could be the key to bringing the farmlands of the village back to life, and the player sets out for the Holy Land to participate in a bullshit tutorial, daring trials, and explore the wastelands once more. Fallout 2's main thematic elements now come in the form of cooperation and fraternity, two topics often hand in hand but separated ideologically. Many settlements in Fallout 2 are struggling, but they can find help in each other if the Chosen One is willing to help them come together. They can make the wasteland a better place. Fraternity is kind of more an overarching theme. We'll talk factions in a second, but there's also religion. Local religions based around Vault 13, or sci-fi author Richard Hubble, are prevalent all throughout California now that the stories of the Vault Tool have been passed from generation to generation. There's also a lot more, we'll call it intimacy, in Fallout 2 as well, with the player getting perks the more they score. There's also, at the twisted and depraved end of the furthest any human, rational or otherwise, would stretch for eternity, a whole lot of slavery in Fallout 2. Liberating slaves or reprimanding those who abuse their slaves is a thing you can do over and over again in this game. Even the currency in Fallout 2 is radically different. Bottle caps are no longer the legal tender for the world of the wastes, instead replaced by bright, shiny NCR dollars. Needless to say, in Fallout 2, the player explores a post-apocalypse. Two major factions are at play in both games to some extent, though they're much more prevalent in Fallout 2. The New California Republic and the Brotherhood of Steel both reflect the past of America in different ways, especially when contrasted to Fallout 2's antagonistic group, the Enclave. The New California Republic was founded in the 2100s after emerging from Vault 15. Four factions emerged from said vault. The Khans, taking after Mongolian warriors and burning and pillaging towns they marched into. The Jackals, more concerned with survival than decency, often turning to cannibalism when food supplies were scarce. And the Vipers, a tribe that abused recreational snake venom and performs intricate rituals inspired by ancient religions. And there was also the people of Shady Sands, a Mexican-inspired suburb entirely self-sufficient and open for trading. The player in Fallout 1 helps Shady Sands crush their raider problems, which leads to the creation of an imperialist task force with plans for reunification. The New California Republic collaborated on a constitution and elected their first leaders in 2189, annexing 5 states: Shady Sands, Los Angeles, Maxon, The Hub, and Dayglow. The NCR is treated like the example model of good post-apocalypse living. They have a government, they have their own currency outside of bottle caps, and it's treated with the legitimacy of legal tender. They have a Congress, a president, a Supreme Court, but their bureaucracy is a major issue for the state. They have their own economy in the form of the NCR dollar, but many traders will go back to bottle caps in places where non-NCR immigration is common, and despite their adherence to pre-war government, term limits were abolished, allowing President Tandy to serve 4 complete terms, and despite their laws forbidding discrimination, there was still plenty of loopholes that allowed them to do so. Religious freedom was respected, unless the NCR saw that religion as promoting violence, so a propaganda campaign against a specific religion would target a group of people for execution or imprisonment, and the NCR regularly used their military power to forcibly annex other regions, forcing Vault City to join the NCR so they could provide freer healthcare to NCR troops. Their gold standard would eventually crumble, as while pre-war life used gold for everything from jewelry to electronics and medical equipment, post-apocalyptic life had next to no use for it. Whereas the water-backed bottle cap had a use. It kept water inside the bottle. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. We'll come back to that. Right now, they're big, they're bold, they're prosperous. They're NCR. The Brotherhood of Steel is a group that is much less prevalent in society, but nonetheless just as vital to understanding where and how American ideologies of the 21st century ended up. The Brotherhood is incredibly territorial, working in underground bunkers and fortresses to collect and hoard technology to better understand pre-war life and learn from it. They own the largest collection of pre-war power armor out of any faction. They are very afraid of outside forces, and attack with laser and plasma weapons they have found and maintained. But joining the ranks is possible if one proves loyal enough. Through and through, the point of the Brotherhood of Steel was that they were mildly xenophobic and used that against the rest of the world to keep its best weaponry and technology for themselves. And that brings us to the Enclave. The Enclave are fascists. There's no debating that, I'm not exaggerating, I barely need to provide evidence. The Enclave is incredibly conservative, they do not value human life outside of their own ranks, look to exterminate impure life, such as those that have lived in the wastelands all their lives, ghouls, other mutants, but at the same time their genetic experiments allowed them to turn the kinds they wanted dead into shock troops they could deploy to wipe out greater numbers of impure races. And the goal was to make America great again. I should mention that they were literally what remained of the pre-war American government, because America was a fascist nation, effectively. America was obsessed with developing their military. They regularly utilized internment camps to round up potential American insurgents, mostly out of paranoia and racism. They fought against labor unions and civil rights as national security was deemed more important. They pushed pervasive propaganda on every consumer good, every film and every piece of media, all designed to push the nation further right subconsciously. They crippled the legislative and judiciary branch to give the president and his military as much power as possible. They terrorized Mexico and the Middle East in what was called an attempt to restore order, but simply existed to occupy land and consume resources. They failed to manage pandemic quarantine effectively and attempted to purchase the exclusive rights to a cure. And they backed out of the UN when questioned on their actions. All of this tinged with corporate buyers providing goods and services that, while still private in nature, might as well have been public given the rampant nationalism that pretty much required the companies to bend to the will of the US government. Oh, and they did some stuff in the Fallout lore too. America's hostility came to a head in 2060 when crude oil reserves ran out. The American government, which had not done any work on electric or fusion vehicles with the intent that they would simply be the only nation using oil in the future, blamed these problems on communism and banned assemblies and protests. If you saw a potential communist that wanted to criticize the United States, you were urged to call the Vigilant Citizens Hotline to have them brought to a camp. A Red Scare soon followed. Whatever technological progress could prevent a war with China, the invention of reliable fusion, the creation of drones or post-oil products, were halted, and the funds to develop them were dumped into nuclear weaponry as the US entered another Cold War. China invaded Alaska to seize some oil for themselves as America didn't want to share, continuing to produce gasoline at the price of $7,500 a gallon. This led to the Sino-American War. America needed to be closer to the battle, and used this as an opportunity to consume their neighbor to the north. Annexing Canada and killing off any protesters in the street is a demonstration of power. New weaponry utilizing fusion cells like power armor or laser weapons could not turn the tides for fascist America. They fell into trench warfare with China, beginning a decade-long stalemate. American citizens keeping up with the war were only told that this was a defensive maneuver. China was attacking dear sweet Uncle Sam and we had to tell them to stop. That's not the case. In 2074, the United States attacked the Chinese mainland and was still embroiled in a war with Canada over their land. The U.S. economy was stretched paper thin, and both the U.S. and China were on the brink of a financial collapse, the end of an empire for either side, but both refused to accept defeat. The U.S. had installed a garrison at West Tech in California and accelerated the funding of the forced evolutionary virus, originally meant to be a new plague vaccine. By 2077, the United States had reclaimed Alaska, but now had torn their way through Canada and were forced into attacking citizens who spoke out against the war. FEV research made its way into the newspapers and it caused global outrage, especially given how there was some speculation that the new plague might have also come from the US at the time. The new plague came from the US at the time. Food supplies were scarce, riots broke out at food banks and were quelled with power-armored soldiers gunning down starving protesters, and the new war in China made the entire world upset, as America fought for a decade with thousands of casualties, effectively destroying their own economy, just to reclaim Alaska. American consumerism had ground to a halt. The dollar was worthless. Advertising mascots went from selling safety and liberty to simply telling you how to prepare for the end. And if you didn't have the money to live in a vault, you better hope ducking and covering would help you. Oligarchs left the US, the government moved operations to an offshore oil rig, and the chain of command completely broke down when the military discovered FEV was being used against each other, with soldiers refusing to kill American and Canadian protesters being infected, which led to the army themselves riding against the government, now out of sight and out of harm's way. The first nuclear strike touched down at 9 a.m. on October 23, 2077, and by noon, there was nothing left of the US. But all of this was born from American paranoia, the fear they might not be the greatest country on earth. The solution was never to solve the problems, it was to bully the world into being below us. Not about building ourselves up, it's all the trappings of fascist Italy, Germany. But it's real, it's here, and it's rooted so heavily in consumerism and patriotism, and could have very well become our future. None of this is clean, pretty, or elegant. It's brutal, animalistic war. But it was all spurred by America's exceptionalism, rampant nationalism, and this idea of the American dream. Giving people in our nation the best we can give them, even if it means destroying another nation so we're still on top. but their bureaucracy and conservative views inspired the New California Republic. Their hoarding of resources for the supposed betterment of mankind is seen in the Brotherhood of Steel. And their everything else is all Enclave, because the Enclave is the US government, plain and simple. In Fallout 2, the player seeks to return to Vault 13 to obtain the Gek. When they arrive, they discover that the vault has been raided by the Enclave. The Gek was a piece of pre-war technology that contained basic amenities used to construct new settlements. A cold fusion power generator, a basic matter replicator that could turn water into basic materials like building supplies or food, fertilizer system, some seeds, some soil supplements, and dozens of discs worth of pre-war information, ranging from encyclopedias to survival guides to defense schematics. In the end, they succeed. The fighting is over, and the town of Arroyo is free to grow, becoming a prosperous post-apocalypse under a dusty sky in 2248. And then, silence. The Fallout series was used mostly for spin-offs after Fallout 2, a turn-based tactics title based on Enemy Infestation's engine and developed by Micro Forte, and Titus Interactive produced a beat-em-up game. Both were titled Brotherhood of Steel, to be extra confusing. Neither were written by the team behind the first two Fallouts, and Interplay was desperate for cash, which led to quick turnarounds, meaning minimal Q&A, which led to... Prior to their demise, Interplay's Black Isle studio was working on a third numbered Fallout, codenamed Van Buren. The game would have been set in the American Southwest and feature the player taking the role of a former prisoner. Their prison is broken into and they escape into the wasteland, eventually learning of why they were broken at in the first place. The Tibet's prison was run by a pre-war experimental computer named Odysseus. After the war, Odysseus developed a split personality, but regardless held countless pre-war documents in his database. Victor Presper, a former NCR scientist, had become disillusioned with the debauchery of the post-apocalypse. With the help of Odysseus, he was able to learn of a ballistic satellite that could light up the world once again, spurring a second apocalypse. Presper would preemptively pick out the best and brightest, the people he trusted most, stick them away, and once the dust settled, they would emerge from Boulder Dome to rebuild his world to his liking. Though the core thematic elements of Van Buren are lost to time as very little documentation from its development has been released, it doesn't take the smartest man in the world to infer that Presper is very much stuck in his ways, his own one-man enclave, playing the people around him for fools while he works to send humanity back another 150 years, putting them in the same boat they were when the bombs first dropped. He seems unwilling to learn from history, and willingly lets it repeat, even though there's still at least 2 more ballistic satellites, implying that 2 more men like Presper can step in and make sure the next millennium for humanity is one of zero forward progress, stunting the human race forever. We will see this nuke us back to the beginning take once again, but for now, know that this is not the Fallout 3 we got. Van Buren was cancelled when Interplay closed, and Bethesda Softworks, the lead developers on The Elder Scrolls, had secured the rights to the franchise. Stuck with thousands of pages of intricate lore weaving a story of America, how American exceptionalism is a suicidal worldview that prevents other nations from growing, how class disparity and oligarchy can destroy a nation, how consumerism is unsustainable, and the constant drain on resources will lead to downfall, how war dehumanizes those fighting it, and how a nation centered on war is a nation centered on its own death. Bethesda put one person in charge of the script right at the outset. Emil Pagliarulo. The sheer volume of lore is dizzying. I've been having a hard time keeping it together just writing this script. But regardless, Pagliarulo persisted. Director at Bethesda Softworks, Todd Howard, was insistent that Fallout 3 should be set in Washington, D.C., practically in the backyard of Bethesda's corporate headquarters in Bethesda, Maryland. With every prior Fallout set on the West Coast save for tactics, Pagliarulo had a completely clean slate to work from. He had the ability to form new factions, tell new history, and create something truly unlike Fallout 1 or 2. This didn't happen, mostly because of the sheer volume of lore and the lack of contact with the series' former writers. He instead started by picking 2 major warring factions and pitting them against each other in a relatively standard ideological battle, akin to how the player fights the Master, some blighted beast part man, part mutant, and part machine in Fallout 1, seeking to destroy mankind with an army of mutants, the New Generation. It's just a shame that what Pagliarulo had effectively done is he picked the 2 worst factions for the job. The Brotherhood of the Steel and the Enclave are the only two named factions from prior Fallout titles to appear in this treatment of Fallout 3. The Brotherhood without the NCR to contrast them make their appearance alongside the Enclave look one-sided. Luckily, they instead played up their knight-like aesthetic and operations, creating a more traditional good guy, bad guy plot with little actual nuance in its story. And there's super mutants in DC as well, unrelated to the two factions at war. That's just how it is. At least the music's good. Enon Zir is a good counterpart to Mark Morgan, and both kind of do that industrial ambient thing well. Fallout hasn't had a main theme before, and now it does, and it's a really good one. So, full credit there. Fallout 3 almost reads like a soft reboot, taking the ideas from the Fallout series and reinventing them, streamlining them, putting the months' work of planning and pre-writing that Black Isle had done in the cupboard and only holding on to the ideas and concept art. The Brotherhood of Steel, or rather Lion's Pride, are unquestionably the good guys. They're looking to make the wasteland safe. The Enclave are still unquestionably the bad guys, looking to rid the world of impurity, but their motivations are paper thin, and they are led by a robot voiced by Malcolm McDowell that they have christened the next US president. The two factions are fighting over a water purifier installed into the Jefferson Memorial, Project Purity. This is the life's work of Catherine and James. And if successful, the entire Potomac River would be full of clean, pure, drinkable water. This is really the entirety of the plot. Sure, there's ghouls and mutants and the like, but the how and why are very, very different. In Black Isle's lore, ghouls required the specific conditions Vault 12 offered, exposure to just enough radiation to necrotize one's flesh, but not enough to kill them. In Black Isle's lore, super mutants were the work of the Master, a race of beings designed through careful FEV usage and proper test subject acquisition to produce the hulking monstrosities we see today. They can carry mounted turret weapons in one hand. In Black Isle's lore, the Enclave's entire operation was run on an offshore oil rig, and that was the entire Enclave. I don't think we're in Black Isle anymore. Paired with the amount of sandpaper taken to the rough edges and burrs of Fallout's complex lore, Fallout 3 forces the series to take the leap from turn-based RPG to real-time shooter RPG hybrid. This changes everything, but so much more than is clear at first. The map is no longer a large overworld with random encounters breaking up travel time between settlements. I mean, it is, but every nook and cranny along the way is completely explorable, with plenty of diversions that offer no real major bonuses for your hard work. You can now see encounters coming your way and prepare in whatever way you deem necessary, stealthing around the encounter, fighting them head-on, or laying traps for them to walk right into. Additionally, combat is in real time, with any decisions as to what limb you attack being left up entirely to the player's aim. You can activate a combat system akin to the one used in the Interplay titles through the Vault-Tec assisted targeting system. This pauses the game and lets you spend action points to assemble an attack queue to target a foe's extremities. This simulates a turn-based experience if the player only uses VATS correctly. You'd wait for your AP to refill, and that's akin to the enemy's turn, but unfortunately opening the Pip-Boy pauses the game, letting you consume countless bottles of Nuka-Cola or infinite stim packs to heal back to full whenever, without spending any AP. Additionally, VATS can be used like a radar to detect potentially hidden enemies waiting to get the drop on you. Simply press the button occasionally out in the field, and if time stops, you're now aware of the enemy and you've got them in your sights. Or just a regular friendly NPC, because the game will conveniently tell you if it's an enemy or a friendly NPC by the color of their health bar. Fun. There is no proper turn-based combat in Fallout 3 as a result of all the caveats and additions. The end result is you rely much more on regular third or first-person shooting. The combat arenas are actually relatively well designed, with a good deal of verticality in many scenarios to use both close-range weapons like submachine guns and shotguns, as well as long-range weapons like the sniper rifle. If only the gunplay was good. It's worth noting that at the time of Fallout 3's launch, its game engine, Gamebryo, was Bethesda's engine of choice for the past 7 years, used in all the Elder Scrolls titles since Morrowind. There were no guns in those games. There were bows and arrows and magic spells, but those behave completely differently from firearms. Obviously, As a result, the gunplay in Fallout 3 is a bit clunky and stiff, but with occasional smart use of VATS, players can land shots in real time with good reflexes and aim and use the system to cover their weak points or flex their perception skill to its limit. But this leads to the next major issue with being a real-time game with occasional turn-like elements. Fallout 3 is much more combat-oriented than previous Fallouts. Interior spaces are designed for gunplay. You have 3 modes for combat depending on your preferences. Most of the loot you get at the end of areas are weapons, and speech checks are now percentage-based even if your skill is maxed out, which means you might fail a speech check and have to duke it out instead. Or you could just keep your speech stat low, quick save before a check, and keep rolling it over and over and over again until you succeed, which you can do no matter how low your check is, the only issue getting in the way being time. In the rest of the game, a number of new mechanics or changes are at play. Lockpicking is no longer just a simple skill check, but instead a minigame involving getting a feel for where the pick needs to be to undo the lock or risk breaking picks. This isn't how lockpicking in real life works. And hacking, likewise, is a minigame where you play Mastermind with individual letters and a password. Even a large number of perks from the first 2 titles are back and retrofitted for this new shooter-centric gameplay. Some quite faithfully, and some just acting as a weak skill point boost. There's also a number of brand new perks as well, and they typically fit into the latter category rather completely. It's not an awful job at making Fallout work as a shooter. There's definitely some glaring flaws, but for actionizing what was once a text-heavy CRPG, they did an okay job at it given Gamebryo's signature jank. Though because this is a modern AAA game with those HD graphics, floating text over our heads and the occasional creepy claymation model of a face yelling at us just won't do. Every character is voice acted, rigged, and animated, but as a result there is much less dialogue in this game. The sorts of sacrifices made to bring this game to life in full HD AAA quality are all over the place in Fallout 3. We glossed over the plot to this game briefly earlier, so the best way to introduce it is to compare what our 2 factions want. Lion's Pride, and I think I'm just going to keep calling them Lion's Pride because they really aren't the Brotherhood of Steel. You could just have them be a group of people in power armor and call them something different. Lion's Pride is effectively a Brotherhood of Steel offshoot that's taken the reins for the faction in the Northeast, and they're currently seeking control of Project Purity, a water purifier in the Jefferson Memorial. The Brotherhood of Steel outcasts, which are more in line with what we expect of the Brotherhood, kind of just mind their own business. The Enclave on the East Coast is nowhere near as death culty or fascist as their West Coast brethren, and in fact their plan to use the purified water to exterminate mutant threats in the capital wasteland is shunned by a large number of Enclave members, including their second-in-command, Colonel Autumn. The vast majority of them are looking to seek control of Project Purity, a water purifier located in the Jefferson Memorial. These 2 factions have the exact same end goal, and one of them is evil and one of them is good. It's just one of many issues with Fallout 3's world building and lore. A good place to start is Yonder Radio. It's nice. I like the additional licensed music in Fallout's world. It fits nicely, and it makes the game a little more bearable. I don't do well with oppressive dark corridors covered in blood. I don't think anybody does. But a ton of this music is really symbolic of the game's story and conflict, and in one case actually spoils a later quest for some reason. But that's not my issue with it, nor is my issue the fact that only half of Butcher Pete is included. My issue is with the announcements that occur between songs. Three Dog, voiced by Eric Todd Delos, is an energetic and jive disc jockey that comments on the news around DC. This should be quite a handful, given it's the most nuclear environment out of the entire United States. But Three Dog almost only talks about one kid from one vault, seemingly only because he's the only other person to leave said vault that isn't James, the player's father. He calls you by your player rank, which is derived from your karma and current level, and mentions the outcome of a quest you recently completed. He might occasionally talk about a quest you can complete, and sometimes comments on the Enclave or the Brotherhood outcasts, but otherwise he might as well be talking to you directly. It's impossible to get around that fact. His very first broadcast when you leave the vault, if you can hear about it and tune into the radio quick enough, is him talking about James. In your first few levels, you'll hear him comment on someone leaving the vault pretty much immediately. He'll often just go on for hours about the fact that you defused the bomb in Megaton. And due to a bug, he'll often tell you how you accomplished the final quest in the game. Future games would alleviate this by simply talking about the end result of your quests, rarely mentioning you personally, as well as mixing in a ton of superfluous comments that seem to have no bearing on the actual quests you have active. It's just world building. This is a case where Fallout 3 had to trip and fall so other games could run, but it's still bothersome because these are AAA level writers at play. I feel like this is something that should have been commented on and resolved in the writer's room. Perhaps most egregious, or least egregious if you want to be extra petty, is the addition of Jet in places it simply should not be. Jet was a chem that first appeared in Fallout 2, made by a teenage chemist named Myron, by essentially aerosolizing Brahmin manure. Of course, in Fallout 3, Jet made its way into vaults that had never been opened after the Great War, which means that Myron had to be retconned into simply rediscovering the drug, or simply lying about creating it. Which then begs the question as to why Zero Jet was discovered in California prior to Myron popularizing it in 2241. Also, why is there no sign of it in Appalachia circa 2103? We'll talk Fallout 76 when we get there. Ghouls, which are formed over months of exposure to radiation, can be made instantly with a strong enough dose. They also don't need to eat or drink as much, and they are much more resistant to chems, which makes the entire questline about the Boneyard pointless. Super mutants, the Master's life's work, having gone through years of revisions, are simply just made by injecting people, just anyone, with FEV. They appear to have some sort of objective, kidnapping people hanging close to DC, but their motives are never exposed beyond that, whereas the mutants in Fallout 1 had a very specific goal and a leader. The Gek, which was a fusion reactor, some seeds, a basic replicator, and some general knowledge about agriculture, now also specifically contains a water purifier, not information about how to build a water purifier. The bottle cap, that ubiquitous currency of the West Coast because the hub would bottle water and use the caps to seal them off, is now the currency in this game mostly because they're hard to reproduce and are shiny. The Enclave continues to fight in DC after their main West Coast headquarters is destroyed, and their East Coast HQ joins it, and the remnants of the Enclave following that ordeal continue to fight for entirely unknown reasons. The world, which should have started coming together in 200 years, is still in disarray, even though the West Coast was hit with a fair share of nukes and not only houses cities with populations in the hundreds, but in many cases local religions based on the vaults have sprung up, whereas the East Coast has no local religions or cults aside from the Children of Adam and the Tree Minders, who simply worship radiation and a single tree, respectively. Speaking of that tree, Harold, a ghoul-like mutant in the first two games who bore fruit from a tree on his head, has been rooted into the ground in DC, and begs for death as he can no longer travel. This is the only character from Fallout 2 to appear in 3, and your main goal is to kill him. And on the topic of killing, the single most inexcusable part of Fallout 3's world and lore. Your destiny is pointless. Your ultimate goal is to die as a sacrifice for someone else's life's work. James is executed by the Enclave for refusing to turn over Project Purity to them, and your ultimate mission is to activate the device. It will flood the room with deadly radiation, killing you instantly. At launch, trying to talk to any of your companions into turning on the purifier would lead to them refusing, even ones that should be immune to radiation. Fox is one of the smartest companions in the game, and is also immune to radiation as he's a super mutant. He specifically tells the player,
"No, I'm sorry, my companion, but no. We all have our own destinies, and yours culminates here. I would not rob you of that."
Your sacrifice is supposed to be seen as this noble and pure thing. In the grand scheme of things, though, it's a group of people killing a kid that's 18, 19 years old at the oldest, because his dad died maybe 3 days prior in the same room. You could send Sarah Lyons in, but she would die and you would get a bad ending for that. It seemed to be good that you died, even if there was no reason for you to die. This is actually based on a similar heroic sacrifice from the Van Buren script, but that one was entirely justified. In Van Buren's conclusion, the player is confronted with a nuclear array that will drop nukes on many major settlements in the wasteland, sending everyone back to the Stone Age once more and eradicating any life that had stepped outside of its vault in the past 176 years, which would be nearly all life. You could disarm one of the nukes, but you wouldn't have time to disarm all of them. unless you programmed one of them to instead target the Bomb 001 satellite, which would preserve life on Earth but sacrifice yourself and kill Victor Presper. Obviously, being on a satellite, there is no way out. There are many ways out of the conundrum at Project Purity. Many of them are already in the game, standing there, staring at you, calling you irrational for not wanting to die. This ending was so bad that it was retconned by the third DLC to let you send a rad-proof companion to activate the purifier, as well as making the resulting radiation poisoning simply put the player in a 2-week coma. They emerge out the other side able to see the aftermath of Project Purity's activation, and then go killing once again regardless, like nothing happened. You can literally wake up from your coma, grab your gun, and just start slaughtering once again. That is by far the most inexcusable part of Fallout 3's plot. But it's not the dumbest. The fact that the game is forced to end with your death makes the whole quest not worth it, but it's not specifically lore-related. No. This one addition to the world of Fallout trumps the boneheaded writing quality tenfold, in my opinion. This game introduced Liberty Prime, a gigantic, communist-hating, nuke-chucking robot. This is not an invention of the post-war world, no. This gigantic, communist-hating, nuke-chucking robot was meant to be the linchpin that recovers Alaska from the Chinese during the Sino-American War. When the game reveals that the American government, absolutely starving for resources and low on funds, had a gigantic, communist-hating, nuke-chucking robot, it should have been a great big, oh fuck off moment. We should be incredulous that the government, rather than building 100 sets of power armor and 100 M199 liquid-cooled battle rifles to supply 100 troops, built one gigantic, communist-hating, nuke-chucking robot. This is the absolute largest monument to America's wasteful spending, wanting a monument to their own nationalism instead of well-supplied troops. The issue is that Liberty Prime is played entirely straight and nobody bats an eye at it calling members of the American government communists, or the fact that it uses nuclear weaponry to clean out the streets of the incredibly irradiated DC, a wasteland that still looks frozen in time maybe just 25 years after its immolation, even 2 centuries later. Liberty Prime, in better hands, would not have seemed wholesomely patriotic in the slightest with very few changes. It could act as a walking symbol of just how fascist America had become, by declaring everything from any amount of healthcare to drinking fountains as communism, by refusing to attack the Enclave at first because they're American citizens, by having a laser beam tuned to play Stars and Stripes Forever while causing horrifying amounts of damage to downtown DC, a purely demonstrative act of patriotism that would have cost countless lives if used in combat. Liberty Prime would have been a more proper foil to Frank Horrigan, the final boss of Fallout 2 and the Enclave's own superweapon. Frank was exposed to FEV while working as a slave for the Enclave, and he was brought in to be the subject of experiments. Standing at over 12 feet tall, he was strapped into custom-designed life support power armor, and he's drugged so heavily he's only lucid for mere minutes out of the day, but nonetheless is capable of tearing everything from people to Deathclaws in half with his bare hands, and is able to withstand gunfire or even plasma blasts without taking a scratch. Frank was the Enclave's closest thing to a nuke. They'd send him into an area and he would paint the countryside red with their blood effortlessly, and would then be put back to sleep so his body could heal from the stress of being this damn powerful, ready to be used once again. He was a weapon through and through, not a person anymore, and in Fallout 2 he is one of 2 required kills. Frank doesn't decree his enemies communists, but he is more or less engineered to love his country, love the Enclave, and is a testament to just how much trouble the US government would go through to build a superweapon. The sheer volume of his firepower is meant to be oppressive to a cartoonish degree. This guy is only meant to kill. And it's frightening as hell. Liberty Prime should elicit the same response we have to Frank, even if it's fighting on our side. Players should feel a bit unnerved that this was even deemed a good idea. Its weapons are impractical and dangerous to everyone around it. Its callous nuke-chucking paired with its comedically overzealous communist-hating would be crystal clear evidence that the world had indeed gone mad. Its weak points are obvious. Its arsenal ruins the landscape as it travels, and its energy consumption and general cost would spell the end for the United States before any Chinese officer with an AK would be able to do anything. But Fallout 3 so carefully rides the line between using the communist-hating, nuke-chucking robot to prove how backwards the US is, and falling in love with its destruction. It turns the fight against the Enclave and the game's conclusion into an absolute curb stomp. Enemies, companions, players, friendly NPCs, everything ground to a chunky ragu underneath its feet. The landscape carpeted in nukes chucked into it, and communist-hating rhetoric blasted fruitlessly into the air as it travels. It reads like one writer was fighting to make a pointed statement about the state of America's own fascism, and another writer saw Liberty Prime and went, "Wow, cool robot!" It's so close. It's so close. Making a statement about whether or not something is good or bad doesn't make your work less morally gray, but it does prevent you from selling, say, a gigantic, communist-hating, nuke-chucking robot like some sort of beacon of patriotism. We can still argue over just how necessary such a behemoth would be in the war effort in Alaska, whether the logistics surrounding a gigantic, communist-hating, nuke-chucking robot would be worth it, or if the United States government and the Enclave should have just outfitted 100 extra men with weapons and armor built from Prime's scraps. This is the most insane part of Fallout 3's approach to the lore. Paired with the straight-up sinful ending that later had to be retconned in a DLC that featured more antics from America's favorite gigantic, communist-hating, nuke-chucking robot, and allowing you to send your companions into the reactor at the cost of being seen as a coward, and also getting to blow up a shuttle crawler for some reason. Yeah, people hated this game when it launched. Famitsu gave it a 38 out of 40, and it won 12 awards in 2008 alone. A lot of critics were able to put aside the game's lackluster writing thanks to the rather revolutionary blending of FPS and RPG gameplay, and thanks to being a relatively underground series, prior to this installment, Fallout 3 outsold the rest of the series combined in just its first week. This was Bethesda's best-grossing launch ever by this point, and in 2 scant months had shipped just shy of 5 million units. This was considered by many to be one of the best RPGs ever made at the time. In the Guinness Book of World Records, Gamers Edition 2009 sums up this sentiment best. After a 10-year break, many will not be familiar with the previous 2 Fallout titles. That doesn't matter. Fallout 3's developer Bethesda knows what they're doing when it comes to epic RPGs, and this is everything sci-fi fans could have hoped for. This is an apocalyptic adventure you will never forget, and a must-have game. That doesn't matter. That was, honestly, the perfect way to sum up all of Fallout 3's lore and world-building issues. To the large majority of fans, the fact that Jet's mentioned in pre-war documents, the Enclave isn't all at the Poseidon oil platform, the fact that you kill Harold, none of it mattered to a mainstream audience. Most players see a wall of text and click right through it, and the CRPGs were so far off they might as well not even existed. Besides, they were CRPGs, which were, even for 1997, seen as a stale genre in the wake of faster-paced action titles like Quake and Half-Life. The role-playing game had gone the way of the point-and-click, and Fallout couldn't keep up with the likes of Blood or Shadow Warrior. This was a reintroduction to the world of Fallout. Its inclusion of nice brand factions and bottle caps in a dilapidated wasteland 200 years out kind of needed to be there to sell people on the world. I get it. If we opened with a pristine wasteland and the currency was an NCR like a coin, there would have been a pretty wild disconnect. But why the heck does it need to take place 200 years after the bombs, though? No idea. It was just a nice round number, probably. But enough of that. Fallout 3 had become Bethesda's best-selling title, and that set 2 precedents. The lore from the past games did not matter. It could be as malleable as they wanted it to be. They were truly in charge, and that if Bethesda wanted to mop up the money, they would have to make another Fallout game now. Bethesda had gotten to work on their next Fallout as soon as DLC for Fallout 3 was over. We didn't talk about the DLC. Honestly, there isn't much to talk about besides Broken Steel and aliens. Little Gray Men had appeared in previous Fallout titles as special encounters, pop cultural jabs that would take up your time and occasionally leave behind valuable loot, or just a self-aware comment about the absurdity. They weren't canon until Fallout 3's Mothership Zeta. With this DLC, aliens had become part of the Fallout lore, being widespread knowledge after the sudden disappearance of the Clarabella 7 space probe during the space race. This game also canonizes several aspects of the Cthulhu mythos if we accept the Dunwich building as canon, as holotapes chronicle the life of a man named Billy who goes insane, ranting for Alhazred, as well as a whispering obelisk dedicated to the deity Ugg-Qualtoth, which is a clear stand-in for Yog-Sothoth. This isn't explicitly stated, but it's implied that the Eldritch and extraterrestrial are partially responsible for the collapse of the United States in some form. Perhaps just to quell how screwed up the nation was prior to their devastation, maybe to yield some amount of sympathy for the clearly fascist dictatorship the US had become. The Enclave uses alien technology. But Bethesda was nonetheless working on their next game as soon as they concluded the DLC, and they wanted to explore pre-war life with it. However, they were also working on the next Elder Scrolls title, and as a result sought out Obsidian Entertainment to work on a spin-off title. Obsidian was founded in 2003, roughly 6 months before the closure of Black Isle, with most of the team leaving the Interplay subsidiary to work on the likes of Neverwinter Nights 2 and Alpha Protocol. Obsidian and Bethesda had collaborated in the past on a Star Trek title that was ultimately cancelled, and as the team had previously worked on Fallout, Bethesda seemed confident in the company. There was just one issue. Obsidian had never made a AAA title before, and Bethesda only gave them a year and a half to develop their spin-off, with 3 months set aside for Bethesda to do quality assurance testing. At first, Obsidian wanted to make a direct sequel to Fallout 2, but as Bethesda was also working on a prequel of sorts, they were asked to set their game after Fallout 3, through their location of choice, and general pitch was approved. I've already covered the large amounts of apparent and implied corporate sabotage, or more likely just gross mismanagement, that plagued New Vegas in another video, but a quick rundown. Bethesda usually takes 3 to 4 years to make a game, and Obsidian was given half that. They had one programmer sent by Bethesda at first. They were an Oblivion modder who had worked through Gamebryo and the Fallout dev tools with the team. The writing team was hard at work building a network of character interactions and factions as a send-up to Fallout 2, as Bethesda's title was a clear send-up to Fallout 1. Gambling minigames were made out of little more than UI elements to pad out the game's runtime. Players would naturally get sidetracked and suckered into trying to make back what they lost at the poker table. And many plot threads and quest lines just stopped, with clear indications as to where they would have gone if they had more time. This isn't getting into the obscene amounts of limitations put on the game's DLC to keep it from going over budget or bleeding into Skyrim's launch. So what did we get from New Vegas? Let's cover the major gameplay tweaks and then discuss the actual thematic elements later. First off, so many more skills are used in checks in New Vegas. In Fallout 3, you'd often use specials like Strength, Perception, Intelligence, alongside skills like Medicine, Science, and, of course, Speech, and even perks like Cannibal or Child at Heart, to take shortcuts in dialogue trees with NPCs. But New Vegas pretty much lets you use every skill at one point or another. Features special options for obscenely low stats alongside obscenely high ones, and often various skills are used together to obtain the outcome you're here for. Speech checks are treated much the same, with the percentage system completely omitted. You might have noticed that in previous footage in this video, I actually have been playing Fallout 3 inside New Vegas. That's thanks to the Tale of Two Wastelands mod. It's good, sometimes. Fallout 3 is notoriously hard to run on modern hardware, thanks to some goofy fucking whingy lumps at Microsoft. But as a result, I have zero footage of the percentage-based speech checks, and there's a couple other minor differences. Much like the man behind the curtain, I'm going to ask you not pay attention to that. Secondly, skills are so much more intertwined in New Vegas than in Fallout 3. Each weapon has a specific strength stat to use it correctly, alongside requiring a skill check to use weapons without penalty. If your guns or melee stat and strength are low, you can still fire the Gobi campaign scout rifle or swing the bumper sword. But your melee swings will be slower and your weapon will sway dramatically more in your hand. Likewise, melee and unarmed players can unlock new attacks to pull off in VATS to go along with the called shots system guns users get. You need to up your survival skill to get the most out of food items, which now heal gradually, whereas upping your medicine skill lets you get the most out of stimpaks, healing powders, and chems, which all work instantly. Combat is also pretty massively fleshed out in New Vegas, with the first major change being the reintroduction of damage threshold versus damage just being fed through damage resistance in Fallout 3. Technically, Fallouts 1 and 2 had 3 different damage reduction stats, Damage reduction was a stat that determined how handily your body and armor could diffuse the shock of an attack. Damage threshold was how easily your armor could absorb attacks. And armor class determined whether or not you could even be shot at given what you're wearing. In Fallout 3, damage resistance is the only armor-centric stat. Every piece of armor took a proportional amount off of each hit landed, so good armor might cut half or more of each attack's damage. In New Vegas, armor has both a damage reduction and a damage threshold, with damage reduction being applied first multiplicatively, with damage threshold then absorbing damage after. This makes enemies with stronger armor very difficult to deal with, as they can completely eat your attack if their DT is high enough, and weapons like shotguns that deal low amounts of damage over a large number of projectiles work much better on unarmored opponents. Don't fret if you do rely on your boomstick though. Fallout New Vegas lets you scrap your ammo and reconfigure it into new and exciting forms. For instance, the 12-gauge shotgun shells aren't just stuck being buckshot. Need to pierce armor but want to keep the advantages pellet spread brings? Craft flechettes to pierce through 6 damage threshold. Hunting vermin or fleshy opponents with your lever-action rifle? Hollow point rounds deal close to double the damage but also are thrice as affected by damage threshold. Got a bunch of useless coins? Turn them into shotgun pellets. Wish your double barrel was more like a rifle? Craft slug rounds to get just one projectile doing the full damage. Are you on a budget? Junk rounds exist for many ammo types that deal less damage and foul up your weapon easier, but are much, much cheaper to get a hold of. Got a 223 rifle and wish it was more accurate? Competitive match shooting rounds, hand measured to be exact, fire straight as an arrow and do more damage to really show that paper target, or raider skull, who's boss. There are so many ammo types that it can even sometimes get hard to tell them apart, but they're almost all based on real-world ammo. Barring, of course, energy weapons and Tesla slug rounds. There's like electrical slug rounds for the shotguns. But because so many of the ammo types are based on real-world ammo types, knowledge of firearms will help you quickly learn the ammo customization, and vice versa. You don't need to use custom ammo, but there's something just so satisfying about turning a bunch of crap shotgun shells into magnum buckshot that blows away the competition. But again, combat isn't the only thing you do in New Vegas. You can complete most questlines and get most endings without ever having to kill anyone. Your initial quest as a courier for the Mojave Express is to track down a guy who stole your parcel and left you to die with a bullet to the head in a Nevada grave. When you do track him down, you have the option to snatch it out of his pocket, and you can leave him alive and well. You could wait for him to get captured at the Cottonwood Cove Fortress, at which point Kaisar hands you the stolen merchandise and asks you to dispose of Benny, which you can do by just letting him run free. You can take Robert Edwin House out of control of the Lucky 38 casino by simply opening his life support pod. And if you don't upgrade the Securitrons and make a break for the other end of Hoover Dam in the final quest, you can convince the leaders of the NCR and Caesar's Legion to stand down. If you want to play melee-centric, you can unlock new ways to use your arsenal as you rank up and learn new moves from characters in the Mojave. And if you want to stealth the whole game, there's nothing stopping you from sticking a grenade in somebody's pocket when they're not looking, or just sliding around all sneaky-beaky-like. The guns get a lot of new toys, too. I mean, the Gamebryo engine was rebuilt to accommodate them for Fallout 3. Might as well make them fun to use. And they did. Fallout 3 also has very similar playstyles. The only things you need to kill in the game are mutants and a single roach. You can leave everyone else alive using your skills, but New Vegas makes the most of them in almost every situation. When I first played Fallout New Vegas, the fact I wasn't saving the world or defeating an evil organization, I was simply choosing who owned the Hoover Dam, upset me initially. But there is a lot at stake here that you don't really consider off the bat. Robert Edwin House had founded Robco and used his money and influence to purchase real estate in Las Vegas to build the Lucky 38 Casino, the tallest monument in the Vegas Strip. He outfitted the casino with life support technology that allowed him to integrate himself into his defenses, and use them to stave off the vast number of warheads aimed at Vegas. Without the operating system update he was waiting for, which was set to arrive later that evening, House dealt with a number of OS crashes and eventually fell into a 60-year coma. When he awoke, he found the world in disarray, but his Vegas Strip salvageable. He would keep it an exclusive club, locked behind a credit check, but otherwise, the settlement of New Vegas was born, and House protected it with all of his might. House had Vegas cleaned up for the NCR's arrival, and he had the tribes of the Strip head out to the dam to wait for that army to get there. When the NCR did arrive, they found 3 tribes and a whole army of Securitrons waiting to sign a peace treaty. New Vegas would be seen as the sole property of Mr. Robert Edwin House. The NCR would keep 95% of all the dam's hydroelectric power, and all Mr. House asked for was for the NCR to protect the Strip, alongside his Securitrons, and to keep just 5% of the world's largest output of clean hydroelectric energy at the present moment. Mr. House made the deal with the NCR for protection, but if they acquire his platinum chip so he can upgrade his defenses... Mr. House made the deal with NCR for protection, but if the player acquires his platinum chip and gives it to him, he can upgrade his defenses. He doesn't need the NCR anymore, and thus now seeks to break the treaty and acquire the full output of Hoover Dam. He's a shrewd businessman who seeks to keep the old world alive through Vegas, and being a 250-year-old billionaire has given him eons worth of elitism. The people of Freeside, the folks living just outside of New Vegas, are seen as second-class citizens. House brought in the people he liked from Freeside, and if the rest of the rabble disliked the fighting and scarcity in Freeside that much, they should just pull themselves up by their bootstraps and scrounge up the money to pass the credit check. House is from old money, he's classist, but he's from the old world. He knows what he wants out of Vegas because he lived there before the bombs fell. As previously expressed, the NCR is back, but after a series of events in the last 40 years, they're beginning to show signs of wear. Their expansion eastward has been a slow, arduous process. In the late 2270s, early 2280s, early victories in the Mojave led to a large amount of NCR supporting then-President Aaron Kimball's push for a manifest destiny. They would wipe out the raiding camps, and the new California Republic would build actual settlements in their place. However, the NCR was being pushed back by Caesar's Legion, an ancient Roman-based faction located out of New Mexico, Colorado, Utah. Additionally, the NCR dollar crashed after a war with the Brotherhood of Steel. That led to their gold reserves being bombed by the Brotherhood, and with the Legion's own denarius coins appearing in the Mojave at that time, thanks to their safe caravans and the Legion's constant trades, the bottle cap was once again the standard trade currency, with NCR dollars and Legion coins being converted to caps. The NCR has also let the agricultural and cattle farming industries explode, with Brahmin barons and real estate magnates flourishing under Kimball's deregulation-heavy rule. Kimball is in it for the money and the glory of potentially appearing on the NCR $500 bill. The NCR wants to annex the entirety of the Mojave Desert as a new territory and bring America back to its pre-war days, seemingly oblivious as to why that's a bad idea. If you need to know why it's a bad idea, pause the video, press 0 on your keyboard, and start the video over. The Vegas Strip would pose a fantastic financial powerhouse for the territory should they get their hands on it. Caesar's Legion had pushed the NCR as far back as Boulder City during the First Battle of Hoover Dam, but faced a severe counterattack beyond there. The legate who failed to secure the Mojave was wrapped in rags, set on fire, and pushed into the Grand Canyon for his failure. And Kaiser had declared war on the NCR. They want the dam as it would be a highly strategic asset should they get their hands on it, and they are willing to starve the NCR of power and water should it become theirs, ensuring a speedy victory. These guys are your slave owners and your rapists, if the fact they're modeled after the Roman Empire wasn't enough of an indication. The Vegas Strip is more a white whale for them. Owning it proves they're the strongest empire in the wasteland. It would be all the inspiration they'd need to venture westward and occupy former NCR territory. These are the 3 main armies fighting for control of Hoover Dam, and with it, the Vegas Strip. But that's not all. Benny, a former Great Khan and part of the Bootriders clan, was brought in to run the Tops Casino. Mr. House asked them to don gaudy suits and act cool, being christened the Chairman by the House. Benny saw potential for the formerly nomadic tribe to seek refuge in New Vegas, but their other chief, Bingo, wanted to return to a nomadic life. They dueled, Benny won, and he demanded they stay, killing off dissent in the Chairman. Why was he so determined to stay? Simple. He saw a way to turn Mr. House's technology against him and run the Vegas Strip all for himself. If he could disable Mr. House, reprogram a Securitron to obey his orders, upgrade his defenses with the chip, and place his yes-men in charge, he could rule over Vegas. He shot the courier carrying the chip, he brought the chip to Vegas, he was this close to getting somewhere, and then, oops, oh no, he's dead, oh, how did that happen? Oh, man, somebody shot Chandler from Friends with a shotgun. Oh, that's awful. Who would do such a thing? Oh no, now they're raiding his corpse. It's so sad. Right? It's sad. Motherfucker had it coming. Yes, sir, the player can take New Vegas all for themselves should they desire, or should they accidentally piss off all the other major factions. There are 4 major endings to choose from, each with their own branch of main quests and a whole slew of side activities. But if you want the good ending, you simply put the game down and never play it. No one's ending is a good ending. Each has their own flaws. Mr. House sees the Vegas Strip as a business, not a settlement, and will push the kings out of Freeside if they had formally established a truce with the NCR. Caesar's Legion will attack Novak no matter your ending, and they will enslave the people of Freeside along other casualties if they win. The NCR will increase the taxes on settlements like Good Springs, causing them to become gentrified as older retired folks cannot keep up with the taxation. That creates a future homelessness problem and a free, independent New Vegas. That's plagued with issues, and it dominoes in places the courier might not have expected, such as causing the followers of the Apocalypse's medical center to collapse under the stress of being the only reliable source of healthcare, while Good Springs flourishes. There is no one best ending. Each path, even if you finish the quest to the best of your ability, has some bittersweetness in there. And it's because New Vegas is a large, sprawling area home to a lot of ideologies. And as with Las Vegas proper, winning means someone has to lose. And lose they will, as you can kill pretty much every NPC in this game, save for Yes Men and a small handful of others. The Kaiser can die from complications of his brain tumor, or just be blasted in the face with a missile. Aaron Kimball can be sliced and diced into julienne fries, and many quest-important minor NPCs can be killed off, in many cases causing their second-in-command to become a quest giver, or even failing an entire chain of quests you didn't know you had. There's a hidden perk you can unlock by eating the bodies of all of the major faction leaders. Anyone can die, but anyone can cheat death, and it's all up to the courier to decide as they blaze a trail through the Mojave who lives and who dies. That is, if the courier even cheats death to begin with. New Vegas introduces hardcore mode, which requires more than just tending to your wounds every now and again. Stimpaks and Radaway now also heal gradually over several seconds. Doctor bags aren't insta-heals for your extremities, Stimpaks can't restore a broken bone, and your ammo weighs something now. Companions can be killed, and most vitally, Courier 6 needs to eat, drink, and get regular rest to keep at it. Otherwise, they can die from starvation, dehydration, or sleep deprivation. If that's not hardcore enough, Josh Sawyer made his own mod that makes surviving the Mojave even more challenging. Most of your day is now going to be spent making sure you have access to clean water and safe food, just like someone in an actual dilapidated desert shantytown. This is all paired with the fact that New Vegas was designed by a number of the folks behind Fallouts 1, 2, and Van Buren. While Tim Kaine and Leonard Boyarsky did not return, they weren't at Obsidian at the time and understood that Bethesda bought Fallout so they didn't need to keep coming back to them to make decisions. The game's director and its lead writer were the director on Fallout Van Buren and the writer on Fallout 2, respectively. They did attempt to weld in some references to the East Coast lore. The Enclave's loss at Navarro is what made them travel eastward to seek new territory to claim, and possibly another Frank to Horrigan. Robert House oversaw some preliminary work on the Liberty Prime project, if a photograph in Camp Golf is any indication. The Brotherhood Outcasts and Lion's Pride are seen as a civil war by the West Coast Brotherhood, and the Ibot Ed E is asserted to have once been owned by Colonel Autumn. Other than that, New Vegas is much more a sequel to Fallout 2 than 3, containing a handful of returning characters and resolutions to the loose ends the DOS-era Fallouts had left, especially now that they could be resolved by members of the other game's writing staff. But all is not perfect in New Vegas. One of the biggest core issues in pre-war life was scarcity. The resource wars were what caused the destruction of the Earth, and in the game's first DLC, former lounge singer Dean Domino slips and calls the vending machines in the expansion's casino, which are verified to be matter replicators, a pretty common convenience pre-war.
Those little company stores. Sinclair's toy boxes. Put in a casino chip, get a treat. Like you're some dog doing tricks. Take any of the casino chips, put them into the machine, and you'll get something out. A snack, a cola, something to mend a tear in your shirt. Sometimes you have to know exactly what to ask for. Other times, there's codes for, unconventional items. for emergencies. Yeah, well, machines like those weren't unusual before the bomb. Maybe to you they're amazing. To me, they're grifters without the personality.
These are explicitly designed to turn the chips into items through matter transmogrification. These existed prior to the war. Well, there was no need to fight a resource war then. Simply turn the ceramic chips into biofuel or valuable minerals, and all of a sudden, you don't need to, end the world. Luckily, Obsidian realized what they had done and worked backwards to retcon the issue. A later DLC explains that the vending machines were an experimental technology. But before we talk that, I actually want to talk the DLC for this game. All 4 DLCs tell a single interconnected story through seemingly unrelated areas. And following the DLC in Launch Order chronicles not just a parable about the world they left behind, but a man named Ulysses. Ulysses was a former member of Caesar's Legion. He was almost blindingly loyal to Caesar, and worked as a courier in his spare time. In 2274, Ulysses first saw Hoover Dam, then occupied by the New California Republic. He warned the Caesar of the enemy at the gate, fearing that the dam would spell the death of the Legion, whether they won or not. He continued to explore the wasteland after that, where he discovered the Divide, a settlement that had had a chance at being the next Shady Sands, a divide between the West and the East, between Caesar's Legion and the NCR. Something great, something that could unite the two factions. But that never happened. The NCR and Caesar's Legion fought over the Divide, and amidst the fighting, the NCR hired a courier to deliver a package from Navarro. The parcel boasted pre-war American iconography, but also a strange glyph of an E surrounded by stars. The package was a remote detonator. Buried under the Divide was a set of nuclear warheads, and the package was the ignition. The detonation charred the land of the Divide, leaving behind only mutant monstrosities and savage, brutal weather. Ulysses wandered the wastes, continually asking for the history of this world, scavenging up the past and working as a courier still, having been changed by the ordeal at the Divide. When he discovered that the courier, the same courier who had inadvertently doomed the Divide, was next in line behind him to deliver the platinum chip, he let the player take the job. The first DLC, Dead Money, puts the player in the ruins of the Sierra Madre Casino with next to nothing on them. You cannot bring any of your equipment, and you cannot escape until the DLC is over. The player is constantly on edge in a hybrid survival horror and point-and-click, solving puzzles, paying attention to the characters around them, and picking the correct dialogue options to gain their trust. And avoiding the ghosts in the cloud, 2 horrific science experiments issued forth by Big Mountain. The ghosts cannot be conventionally killed. They will get back up after a few moments. To be defeated, players must completely destroy a limb or decapitate the beasts. Additionally, radios broadcasting detonation commands to the bomb collars strapped to the player and their cohorts make any interior space an unsafe one. Here, the player hears vague whispers of a figure known as Ulysses, and can begin to learn about the character, who is otherwise unmentioned in the base game. At the end of the DLC, the player is presented with the treasure of the Sierra Madre, a cache of gold bullion. The gold is heavy. The player might only be able to carry 1 or 2 bars at most. They can't bring all of this out to the casino in time for its detonation. They are forced to give it up and let go of the past. Unless you exploit a glitch that lets you carry it all home. In which case, congratulations! Each of these bars can wipe out an entire shop's inventory, and with all this gold, the entire Mojave's economy crashes, with you securing literally every cap every shopkeep owns without having any resources to sell to earn any more money. You've ruined the economy, you monster. The second DLC, Honest Hearts, features the courier traveling to Utah. The journey will be long, and the player must pack only a small amount of their limited supplies to bring and leave the rest, and their party, home. There, the player gets ambushed by the White Legs. They are saved and brought to Joshua Graham, who is shocked to learn that the courier coming their way was not Ulysses here to kill him. The courier becomes embroiled in a war against the White Legs, and here learns about a failed venture of Caesar's Legion. Joshua Graham had led an attack on the NCR, who'd retreated into Boulder City. Not out of weakness, but out of tactics. NCR Chief Hanlon had rigged the buildings up with explosives, which turned them into massive frag grenades, sending concrete, rebar, and shrapnel into the attacking legionaries. This kicked off the start of the Legion's loss west of the Colorado River, and Graham was to blame. For his failure, Caesar had him covered in pitch doused in a flammable liquid, lit on fire, and thrown into the Grand Canyon. Joshua Graham survived, spawning a quote that would be taken out of context for years to come.
I survived because the fire inside burned brighter than the fire around me. I fell down into that dark chasm. The flame burned on and on.
Like, he's referring to the literal fire around him because he was literally set on fire. He spent 3 months dragging his bones back to New Canaan, suffering from burns, cuts, broken bones, the works. He arrived a living legend, his torment essentially a baptism. Graham's past finally catches up to him, and the White Legs, a rival faction outfitted by Ulysses, has attacked New Canaan. The courier helps Joshua fight off the faction in a battle of spirituality, in a highly naturalistic area, a pastoral palace constructed by God's will. Oh, and you get to fire an M1911 and a Tommy gun? I thought that's worth mentioning. It's cool. The third DLC, Old World Blues, takes place at Big Mountain Research and Development Center, located at Big Mountain... Say, is this Big Mountain, Arizona? No reason, I'm just asking if the player is Black Mesa inbound. After spending the night at a drive-in, the courier discovers that the think tank, the pre-war scientists now reduced to brains in jars, have replaced their brain, heart, and spine with anomalous materials. The 6 doctors of Big Mountain have continued to experiment while part of their own think tank experiment, which has led to unforeseen consequences as they begin to run out of ideas and shift to more experimental discoveries in their strange little office complex. Ulysses was enraged with them for having forgotten a world outside of Big Mountain, and his passion for the old world, rather than sounding the alarms, sending the entire facility into a panic of, "We've got hostiles," instead made them remember the world outside of their facility even exists, a blast pit brimming with opportunities for new experiments. When Ulysses left, they worked to power up a field that prevents intruders from attacking them. The courier arrives, and after some questionable ethics from the science team, they now have to collect their organs, run errands for the think tank, and convince them to let the player free. The think tank looks like the work of science fiction, but truth be told, they're based on actual Freudian theory. See, if you take some horny people and you stick them in jars for 200 years, they're still horny. The surface sexual tension in this DLC is insane. Kind of to an uncomfortable degree, and a large number of the expeditions the player embarks on indicate that a lot has been on the think tank's collective minds. Players can navigate a frankly disturbing facsimile of Dr. Boris's high school, where he lives out a centuries-long revenge fantasy against 2050's jock and bully Richard Marcus. In the X-13 Research Center, players can test out a prototype stealth gear that fails at its job at being stealth gear. Not only is it medium armor, thus suffering a minor penalty to the sneak stat, but the armor continually talks to the wearer, gets upset when they remove the armor, and injects them with Med-X when it fears the player might die, which leads to them getting addicted to Med-X. Rapidly. Say, what was Med-X called in Fallout 1 and 2? Morphine? Ah, cool. So the Stealth Suit Mark II is pretty much just a fast track to substance abuse? Good job, fellas. And when you return to your home base in Old World Blues, the Sink, you have to deal with a neurotic Securitron that hates its life, 2 light switches that bicker over which ones love the courier more, and yes, you can use Lady Killer or Chassez La Femme to seduce either light switch, which yes, does imply lesbian lamp romance. What is going on? There's a jukebox with the personality of an old blues artist, a genocidal toaster, a sink, and an incinerator both obsessed with purity and cleanliness, of the physical and mental varieties respectively. And all manners of, Jesus Christ, everyone here is insane, why is it like this, I don't even have Wild Wasteland on. Big Mountain is home to a large number of monstrosities, many of which you may have seen before. Night Stalkers and Cazadores are not the work of FEV and radiation. Instead, they're created simply by the think tank playing God, and their creations not only breeding, but breaking free. The vending machines at the Sierra Madre are Big Mountain technology meant to apocalypse-proof the casino so it can double as a fallout shelter. The ghosts in the CloudNet DLC, also the work of particularly cruel Big Mountain experiments, and skeletonized enemies wandering the mountain in Old World Blues, are actually trauma harnesses meant to carry wounded humans back to doctors to get fixed. The issue is that their programming failed, and for the last 200 years, their injured riders have been rotting away, piloted around the area while computers inside have ensured their safety by hijacking their atrophied muscles to shoot and fight off potential attackers. What Old World Blues is about is in its name. The think tank has willfully ignored the outside world, unaware the Great War had come and went, going as far as to hack their own brains to make them forcibly forget. Ulysses knocked some sense into them, reminding them of what had been lost, but they forgot all about it and him the moment he left. They do not want to accept what happened to their world. They do not want to accept that, in exchange for giving up their bodies, their physical possessions, any and all physical pleasures, they've been reduced to producing out their science experiments, biding the time for a moment that will never come, seeking a release that won't arrive. This depression over how things were and the shock over how things are is even seen in Lonesome Road, the final DLC and the actual confrontation with Ulysses. He is bitter at what had become of Caesar's Legion. He detests the NCR for their bureaucracy, and he feels that the world, and the Courier, ought to pay for what it did to the settlement of the Divide. He plans to nuke both the Legion and the NCR, sending both major factions back to square one, sending the world back to 2077 all over again. These warheads were simply buried under the town, as was the case across a lot of the US as it prepped for nuclear devastation. America sleeps in the Divide, giants beneath the earth. Ulysses' final point is a bit of a confusing one, but this is the best I've broken it down. America was its own devastation. It wasn't some unfortunate accident, it was where the nation was headed all along, and there is no denying that. To deny that America was going to destroy itself and bring the whole world down with it would be foolhardy, would be to willfully ignore the past. Likewise, these new factions are trying to make something out of the old, pre-war remnants of the US. But in doing so, in emulating old America, they are doomed to end up the same way America ended up, disjointed, too bureaucratic for their own good, plagued with infighting and issues, and doomed to tear themselves apart. The only way to find utopia in the ashes, in the rubble and debris of the old world, is to cast the old world completely aside, to build something new. The Divide was making the most of a bad situation, and when two factions built out of the old world invaded, when a package from the remnants of the US government arrived, it all went to hell. We can't find solace in the ruins of consumerism, in the shadow of war, in the wake of American exceptionalism's final stop. We need to be different, think different, and be prepared to carve a new destiny. We can't be the capitalistic force of the days of old. We have to think ahead, come together to change the world. War never changes, but men do, through the roads they walk. We can change the world, we can change humanity, by providing a path away from warfare. It's a long and perilous road fraught with many dangers, but if we come together, we can end the strife and struggle and come together as one collective human race. Oh, sorry about all that. Yawn! Who wants to play that dirty old game when we at Bethesda have a new title? Come play Skyrim. Don't play New Vegas. It's not next gen. You can shout at dragons and craft potions and dual wield magic and swords. So in case this video wasn't insane enough, we now need to discuss Skyrim. The role-playing experience of the Elder Scrolls on Xbox was very difficult. Navigating through menus and sub-menus on a gamepad just wasn't fun. What Skyrim did was optimize the role-playing experience to be about perks. Each level up you got to pick either getting 10 more health, 10 more mana, or 10 more stamina. And then you got one perk point to put towards any skill you wanted. If you couldn't afford to level up a perk more, you had to work at the skill, and skill points, true to the Elder Scrolls roots, were gained organically by practicing your craft. Fight with swords to increase your one-handed melee skill, craft weapons and armor to level up smithing, take blows and heavy armor to boost heavy armor, and block attacks with your shield to level up block. These two systems work together side by side to make utilizing any of these skills extremely emergent. And paired with large pastoral chunks of Tamriel that players could explore, Skyrim became the new gold standard, selling over 30 million units. If this was a Call of Duty game, it'd be the best-selling Call of Duty game ever. If it was a Grand Theft Auto, it'd be the second best-selling GTA. It's the second best-selling American-developed video game that isn't EA's Tetris, of all time, behind Terraria by only a few 100,000 units. And all of this is by design. Bethesda put a stop to pretty much every other game they had going during the lead-up to Skyrim, to make sure all eyes were on Skyrim. New Vegas' last major patch was in September 2011, and all future issues with the game would be resolved by fans. The game's marketing came to a stop, and save for an Ultimate Edition released in 2012 to no fanfare, New Vegas got to retire. Yeah, it's worth mentioning that New Vegas got an Ultimate Edition, not a Game of the Year edition, as the game didn't win any major Game of the Year awards. New Vegas launched just a year after Fallout 3 revitalized the series, and as many critics only saw a game that looked like Fallout 3 and reused a ton of Fallout 3's concepts, visual designs, assets, and gameplay, they weren't particularly blown away. What didn't help is that Bethesda did not market this game as being from the writer of Fallout 2, even though that would have helped differentiate it from Fallout 3. It was just seen as a weird, cheap side game that, at best, could have been an expansion pack to Fallout 3 in critics' eyes, and at worst was just a glorified fan mod. What didn't help was, because of its short dev cycle and 3 months dedicated to quality assurance, the game ended up with a ton of bugs and game-breaking glitches that critics couldn't look past. In fact, a number of critics mentioned that Fallout fans would look past the series' long glitches like characters who clip through walls or walk on invisible ground. Series-long glitches that could have only happened in Fallout 3, when the series jumped to full 3D in an officially released title. While Fallout 3 boasted 10 out of 10 after 10 out of 10, New Vegas' critical reception earned Obsidian an 84% on Metacritic, a single point off the bonus Bethesda promised the team if it was a critical success. It wasn't seen as a sequel to Fallout 2, because it wasn't marketed as one, because Bethesda either didn't think people would care, or assumed that people wanted more East Coast content, a successor to Fallout 3, as that was where the money was. But now that Skyrim was where the money actually was, development on Fallout 4 continued, and because Skyrim did so well with a streamlined role-playing experience, Fallout 4 would follow suit. But before we can begin, we have to sit through this opening cutscene. Oh yeah, worth mentioning that every game prior to this one, save for Brotherhood of Steel, was opened with the dulcet tones of Ron Perlman describing the horrors of war and how they relate to your next 2 weeks of role-playing fun. The first of many trends Fallout 4 would buck is not having an opening narration given by... take your pick. Actually, who voices this intro? Brian T. Delaney, huh? Neat. And he's the voice of my husband too? That's neat. Okay, cool. I'm really glad that he gives the opening narration and then dies 5 minutes in. I mean, if you play as Nate, you'll live and you get to experience the thrills of being a decorated war veteran, but the fact that the guy who gives the opening speech appears in-game and can just be that fast is a sign of things to come. So a lot of people get up in arms over the fact that in Fallout 4, both of your options for a starting character have a concrete past, which means role-playing as yourself is much more difficult, especially if you're, say, gay or a lesbian. The ghost of your dead heterosexual spouse lingers over the game pretty much the entire time. However, the only real blank slates in this series are in Fallouts 1 and 3, and that's because you're a young adult hitting the irradiated, sandblasted road for the first time ever in those games. A chance to learn a lot about yourself. Fallout 1's Vault Dweller was just an unlucky sap who got picked to run the errand of finding a water chip. They marry someone named Pat in Fallout 2's lore, but that's after the first game, so, you know. And the only inspiration players are given for Fallout 3 is that they are the child of Dr. Liam Neeson, which really doesn't mean terribly much in the long run. Fallout 2 has you becoming the Chosen One, the one who will one day lead the village of Arroyo, trained from birth to conquer the wastes, an Odysseus of a new generation. New Vegas' Courier gets away with being a blank-ish slate, despite doing that to the Divide, because a bullet to the brain can radically change someone. For instance, most bullets to the brain result in a person turning from a functioning member of society into a corpse. But Fallout 4 is the only game thus far that makes your choice of player character affect your character's history, and the only game where your two player characters are in a relationship and have a son at the time the game begins. I'll stick to calling them by their default names, Nate and Nora, even though Codsworth can call them any of over 1,000 names. Nate is the canon player character. They're the one with all the military experience, and while it's not really their story, they were set to deliver a speech at the Veterans Hall in Concord the coming week, which was ground to a halt by, a nuke. Nora was a lawyer from the Suffolk County School of Law and was just going to assist Nate at the event. It wasn't for her. While many characters, Nate included, comment on his status as a war veteran, there's only a single quest where Nora's law history is brought up. She is the secondary protagonist, for one reason or another. This very concrete past is one of many divisive elements in Fallout 4, but in theory, having a character with preconceived motivation that ticks off the boxes for all the game's gameplay elements isn't a bad idea, if it's done properly. We can look back to the Courier for an example. Nothing in their job implies any amount of intelligence, strength, or luck. A courier with low endurance might have just been able to scrape by all the horrors of the wasteland through sheer luck or sharp senses. A dumb courier might just be dangerously loyal to the Mojave Express, which would give them the willpower to push through. And all in all, it's very difficult to make a character that's ill-suited to the job at hand, as you need to put your special points somewhere. And barring that, also need to tag skills that would help in the wasteland and pick some traits to round out the experience. And if you do make a poorly outfitted character, they were just shot in the head only days, maybe hours ago, so that's totally justified. What does a low intelligence Nate or Nora mean for the wasteland? Is he just that blindly loyal to the fascist regime at hand? Does she rely on luck and keen eyes to help clients out? Let's take a look at the special stats have changed. They all start at 1, and you get some points to allocate, and over the course of the game, you will get to level these stats up to eventually max out all 7 stats to level 10, letting you use each stat's 10 perks. But let me pick my tagged skill first, please. What do you mean there's no skills? Surely they wouldn't just completely remove skills in abstract lockpicking and terminal hacking to being the result of taking specialized perks in their respective special stats, right? That's exactly what they did? Okay, that is a lot to take in. So your special skills are effectively perk gates. Not really an atlas of character creation and specialization, as was the heart of the GURPS system, or the special system of old that was inspired by it. They do affect gameplay. Strength determines your melee and carry weight, perception determines your accuracy and VATS, endurance determines your HP and how quickly sprinting drains AP. There is sprinting in this game, thank God. Charisma determines a lot. Intelligence multiplies your EXP gain, agility affects your max AP, and luck determines your critical hit recharge. But you start with 70% of the special points of other protagonists because this system is radically different from the other games. Some might say to a restrictive degree. This is clearly inspired by Skyrim, a means to streamline the RPG experience to suit console players and newbies brought in by the successes of 3 and Skyrim, but it's missing something. Alright, skills. Look. Skyrim had skills. They were naturally grown by participating in gameplay, emerging based on your actions as Dovahkiin, and Fallout has had no similar system. In other games, your skills could be grown from 0 to 200%, 300 in Fallout 2, and raising them past 100 improved their effectiveness but cost more skill points to increase. 2 per percent after 100%, 6 after 200%. These skills could also be improved with the help of skill books and NPCs that can train your character. Because there was no emergent leveling, and because that might be seen as a far cry from how Fallout's always been, possibly, they were gutted entirely. Nate and Nora are great at everything, perks and special notwithstanding. And, honestly, your special stats are pretty set in stone, whether you know it or not. A 2 in endurance will let you eat and drink irradiated food with less risk, as rads now affect your maximum health. At level 17, the top tier of this perk completely removes the ability to be irradiated when eating or drinking. Likewise, at Endurance 4, you can become immune to chem addiction. Intelligence 2 gives you Medic, which increases how effective Stimpaks and Radaway are, which you'll use a lot of. Luck 5 lets you pick up Idiot Savant, which offers you 3 times the experience from anything at random. The less likely, the higher your intelligence stat, but a 5% chance is still better than not getting the gain. And with how perks are the only thing to level up, the faster you can do it, the better. If you are playing a gun-heavy character, Action Girl or Action Boy refills your AP faster for Agility 5, which is also very helpful for sprinting around the map. And Perception 2's Rifleman lets you do more damage with, quote, non-automatic rifles, unquote, which includes everything from laser and plasma rifles to shotguns. As long as it has a stock, or at the very least, its grip isn't a pistol grip, and it has a spot for Nate or Nora to grip along the barrel, it counts as a rifle. At tier 5, this doubles the damage of a rifle, no questions asked. And now for the elephant in the room, Charisma. This is hands down the best stat, as it's the only one used in skill checks, and functions mostly out of pure randomness. You'll want to level this up, or barring that, invest in perks that will let you get drunk or high without risk so you can cheese skill checks without investing the actual time. On top of that, Charisma 5, 9, and 10 will let you dominate enemies by pointing your gun at them, so long as they are a lower level than you. If you have the second tier of this perk, you can convert those enemies to fight for you until they perish. I swear, this game mechanic feels a little familiar, like I might have seen it in some other game, but I can't put a name to it. whatever. Also, Charisma 7, Tier 1 lets you simply shrug off alcoholism, and even Tier 2 makes getting sloshed doubly good for you. You effectively become a functioning alcoholic as the stat boosts are simply too good to ignore. So the best way to tear through the early game is with a strength of 1, perception of 2, endurance of 4, charisma of 10, intelligence of 2, agility of 4, hold that thought, and a luck stat of 5. We need one more point so we can get Action Girl, but luckily one free special point is just sitting under the crib at Sanctuary Hills ripe for the taking, letting us grab all of these vital skills first tiers by level 11 or 12, and by then the second tiers of those skills begin to open up. Grab a rifle, a shotgun, pretty much any two-handed non-automatic gun, and get ready for this game to become a heck of a lot more manageable. And if you do want more special points, again, you can just spend a perk point to level up one of these skills in lieu of a regular perk. And with an unlimited level cap, you are destined to hit 10 in all stats, as that will give you the most opportunity to take all of the perks. I know what you're thinking when it comes to charisma. Speech checks are going to be important to getting enemies to stand down, to get through the game with minimal bloodshed. But Fallout 4 wasn't designed for minimal bloodshed. Charisma is a percentage-based, luck-centric check, as with Fallout 3 once again, with your chance to succeed the result of taking your charisma stat and multiplying it by 15. With 10 charisma, we have a 150% chance of success, which guarantees easy and medium difficulty speech checks are ours for the taking, but gives us an 85% chance of success in hard checks. No problem, just get your charisma stat to 11, perhaps by hooking up a bottle of beer to a spinal tap or something, and you'll be completing any and all speech checks in the game, no questions asked. But a number of the enemies you'd want to talk down, such as the man who killed your spouse, just won't let you. In prior Fallout games, the only bloodshed you need to put on your hands was that of mutant creatures, or people who absolutely had to die. Enclave President Richard Richardson and his superweapon Frank Horrigan were part of a fascist death cult that were going to exterminate the wasteland if you let them continue to live, and they refused to listen to reason as they had convinced themselves they were in the right. As such, they have to be killed in one way or another. In some character paths in New Vegas, players are asked to kill Mr. House, or President Kimball, to secure Hoover Dam in the Vegas Strip. With Mr. House, players must simply open his life support system, which will cause him to perish due to his fragile immune system getting bombarded with whatever bacteria they've got in the 23rd century post-apocalypse. As for Kimball, the player must kill him personally, but this can be done in many creative ways. You could rig Bear Force 1 to crash or explode. You could firebomb the president. You could plant a bomb on Jeremy Watson, a trooper Kimball honors in his speech with a medal, planting C4 anywhere on the path Kimball takes to the stage, or by, using the Archimedes 2 orbital laser platform to microwave the entire stage. But that's all part of Caesar's Legion's questline. You have to be ready to kill, maim, enslave, and pillage if you're siding with them. In Fallout 3, you can convince an AI that wholeheartedly believes itself to be the ideal US president and a general part of that fascist death cult to both stand down. That fighting a 19-year-old with a gun and dead parents isn't for the best. You can convince Ulysses, a man who has nothing left to lose and every reason to hate you, to fight alongside you and spare your life. You approach Kellogg in Fallout 4 and the game hands you a nuclear catapult in a single round so you can turn him into a fine red irradiated mist strewn all across the room. You can't convince him to give you info on your son. You can't intimidate him into standing down. And if you are playing a no human kills run, this is your third time putting blood on your hands. And the first one that isn't a high-ranking member of the Enclave.
I admire your dedication, but I think we've been talking long enough.
And while we're trying to plead our case with Kellogg as to why we don't want to kill him and failing because the game's not designed for non-competitive gameplay, as we'll see in a moment, we can talk about the fact that another design choice meant to make Fallout 4 a more mainstream crowd pleaser is at work. Courtney Taylor and Brian Delaney are your player character. They're fully voiced. This makes the script for Fallout 4 about 111,000 lines in total, which Bethesda asserts is longer than Skyrim and Fallout 3 combined. But figure that the 1,000 plus names for Codsworth factor into that total, factor in that the lead protagonists are voiced for the first time, and in all honesty, does them being fully voiced offer much to the gameplay? Does hearing halted short sentences with minimal inflection tell us anything about Nate and Nora that text can't? Does watching them say things give us more of a connection than just reading out lines in our head? Was it worth it to condense conversing with an NPC to a 4-way compass that offers minimal help and usually funnels a player down into 4 ways to say yes? Does just having a big, sarcastic button that can just be anywhere from a crude one-liner to a witty pun to a straight-up personal insult work? For Bethesda, the answer is no. In an interview a year after Fallout 4's launch, director and resident face on the big screen, Todd Howard, admitted defeat with the dialogue wheel, citing, "The way we did the dialogue stuff, that just didn't work out well. I know the reasons we tried that, to make a nice interactive conversation, but it was less successful than some other things in the game." Note that they officially removed the dialogue wheel from the next Fallout title, and they just suggest people mod out the dialogue wheel in Fallout 4 if they don't like it. Yes, Bethesda officially condoned modding the game to solve its problems. That's not something they'll fix in a patch. Bethesda leaned hard into mods for their games around this time, and at E3 2017, Bethesda announced the Creation Club, a system to purchase mods made by Bethesda for Skyrim and Fallout 4, with microtransaction credits. Mods were announced at E3. The game's dialogue is weak, as the game is written around having a voiced protag. To make the recording sessions easier on the voiceover talent, they simply don't convey as much information in dialogue as other protagonists do. The courier can say as many as 7 or 8 different things to an NPC based on skill checks and other generic lines. And Fallout 4 funnels the option to perform a skill check into being reliant on a single skill, and the other 3 options are all more or less the same. The dialogue wheel only shows you a snippet of what your character will say, and in theory, I get it's supposed to suggest that, just like real life, you have a core idea formed, you attempt to work backwards to express the idea in your head as words. And each quadrant plays a singular role. But in practice, it's just frustrating that it's impossible to tell if a dialogue option funnels back to the top or if I get railroaded for my choice. If I ask other NPCs in previous Fallout games for more info, I often stay in the menu I'm already in, and when I make a decision that advances the dialogue tree, it's very clear that it will. The fragmented nature of this wheel is clearly an attempt to channel Mass Effect or other similar games with more cinematic cutscenes, but it simply doesn't work in this case. And the crafting and scrapping mechanics? Don't get me, they're not that bad. Building a base feels ridiculously clunky, and it's not easy to build structures that aren't boxy rooms covered in lobster roll advertisements and memes. But in theory, collecting water and food, excesses being stored away in your inventory, being able to use the materials to produce healing items and crafting materials, feels fine. And while managing multiple bases is a pain, another charisma skill lets you link several together as a supply line, letting you share inventory space between them. Managing multiple settlements is a pain, and they're prone to getting attacked in Radiant quests every couple days. But again, if a Bethesda game has an issue, they'd rather you fix it than they fix it, so go grab a mod. Likewise, weapons and armor do not have conditions and are not leveled. You craft leveled upgrades based on perks onto weapons to make them stronger, but otherwise you can pick up a combat shotgun and a hunting rifle in the early game and bring them all the way to the end, no sweat, as long as you mod them to work. There is no real weapon progression chain like in all the other Fallouts. This game is extremely combat focused, and while the gunplay feels fine, it's frustrating that this is about all there is to do in Fallout that isn't building things or thrashing your liver to convince an NPC to cut you a deal. The only other real thing I need to comment on from a gestalt and gameplay standpoint is survival mode. It's New Vegas' hardcore mode, but nowhere near as engaging, as you cannot fast travel and you can only save at a bed, which makes the game absolutely frustrating to play. If you're playing survival mode, clear your schedule, quit your job, stock up on the bare essentials, and actually, don't do that. If you still have a stable career in 2020, you're not doing bad. You got this. One last tiny thing, I promise. Fallout 4 contains 5 songs written post-war, performed by Linda Carter's character Magnolia. But other than those, everything else is not just pre-war, but pre-21st century. The radio's music is old as hell, even for pre-war stuff. This music would have been over 120 years old when the bombs dropped, and we're supposed to expect no new music has ever been written after 1965 or so. I get making retro-futurist covers of anachronistic songs, Bioshock Infinite style, or just writing new music in the style of the Make-Believes and We Happy Few, is difficult and expensive, but it'd go a long way into shaping the world of Fallout. New Vegas uses more modern songs, some as recent as 2004, but that's because it's all folk music. That doesn't change as much. Additionally, the only other post-war music is Andrew WK's Raider music. It's all crappy guitar and poorly constructed lyrics. It's supposed to be bad. Look, I'm not asking for ska in a Fallout game or anything, but music is how we passed on oral traditions and stories before language became a standardized thing. And New Vegas also likewise features custom folk music about the world. Things like the streets of New Reno. Stick a guy with a guitar in settlements singing about his perilous journeys in Point Lookout, or the wreckage he witnessed in Appalachia. Adapt Ragnar the Red to be about the lone wanderer arriving in Rivet City. It's right there. It's right there. But now we need to talk about the thematic and story elements of Fallout 4, starting with, man, how convenient is it that we got approved for the vault not even 3 minutes before the bombs dropped? And look at how quaint and pleasant Sanctuary Hills is. The only signs that this is all a fascist regime is that they're selling nuclear catapults to children in a commercial, and the presence of armed guards outside Vault 111. The opening cutscene is well shot and filmed, it's all live action and meant to bring the world of Fallout to life. There's some issues though. This lady is having a Nuka-Cola in the 1940s, literally 100 years before the drink would be invented. The only time it's mentioned that one could share a nuke with the family in the 20th century was in the story of Sunset Sarsarilla's origins, which is clearly fictional as that soda and water are the only two things people could drink according to the story, as if beer had been completely outlawed in 1918 or something. Additionally, the opening quickly jumps to the accusation that nuclear energy quickly overtook other forms of energy in the 2030s or so. It also declares a shortage of resources overtook the 21st century. The resource wars are still there, but they're juxtaposed with these images of American splendor. This idea that peace became a distant memory is simply not hammered home enough for a world that had slid headfirst into the dank ditch of fascism and asked for a shovel to dig deeper with. Yes, we do see images of shell-shocked soldiers readying themselves for war. We do see images of missile-launching trucks rolling through suburban streets. We even see the Sino-American War's battle for Anchorage. We hear how the entire world unraveled. But then when you get to the pre-game intro quest featuring pre-war America, it doesn't look as awful as Nate describes. Every family owns a car, the homes are spacious with gargantuan lawns and plenty of greenery, neighbors are friendly and sociable, and despite the fact that fascism targets minority populations to act as scapegoats or straight-up prison labor, it seems that the United States has minimized who it deems a threat. There is an interracial lesbian couple living in the town of Sanctuary Hills, implying that tensions the U.S. has fought with for the last 100 years in our world vanish in the following 50, which feels a little unfascist. Call it what you want, but I can't help but feel that Bethesda wanted a pre-war Fallout, even for this brief and shining moment, to minimize the brutality of the pre-war world, to sell its sanitized Atom Punk aesthetic and merchandise, a warm fuzzy feeling of a cleaner, greener future with all that icky ultra-conservative government overreach around. Hell, if the world getting nuked was that big of a deal that roaming missile carriers are ready to fire anywhere and everywhere, shouldn't there be at least a few scattered around Sanctuary Hills? Also, these guys would totally be toast if that shockwave passed just a few feet from their head like that. So after, we venture back out into Sanctuary Hills 210 years later. Some questions. How the hell is all of this still standing 2 centuries later? We're supposed to assume that none of this was cannibalized to make room for new settlements, new trading posts. There's still meds, there's still comic books and plastic bits, decorations are still hanging on the walls, and if you know where to look, frag grenades are still sitting in a garbage can, waiting for an owner to come pick them up. Codsworth, your robot companion, still stands all these years later, still right as rain, though a little tarnished. Nobody's come to try to scrap the robot for parts, nobody's even come claim the robot as their own. He's continued to wander Sanctuary Hills for the past 200 years, cleaning absolutely nothing and making no progress. Why are there still bottle caps in Fallout? So Fallout 2 takes place in a similar location to Fallout 1, and enough time has passed that a major faction has been able to outright replace the currency. The Hub Trading Company did not have the pull of the NCR dollar anymore, and so the player uses dollars. Fallout 3 had no major factions and ultimately was just a Fallout 1 reboot, so the use of caps is justified. New Vegas only uses the bottle cap as an equalizer between the two other types of currencies, both of which are relatively unstable due to local politics. But Fallout 4? None of its major factions have attempted to usurp the bottle cap, despite the fact that manufacturing counterfeit caps would be as simple as getting a clean piece of sheet metal and a cylindrical mold to stamp said piece of metal into. Getting a clean, flat piece of sheet metal might be difficult, but unless metalsmithing has simply gone away, melting down scrap to produce a sheet would still be plenty possible. And of course it's possible, as there are factories around the Commonwealth, and it's implied that when you scrap iron and steel, you have the ability to melt it down and produce machined components for your armor and guns. But what currency would one of these factions spearhead, you ask? Here's a few suggestions. Diamond City is a trading hub that uses hundreds of crates of pennants in their gift shop warehouse as currency. Pennants are thin and portable, and each one can cut in about 3 dozen rectangular bills. Or, the Minutemen could bring back paper bills of credit. The player is paid in bills and speccy for their actions, potentially repurposing pre-war cash to play this role. Or, the Institute could play the we're a 60s, 70s sci-fi world and thus use a generic ambiguous credit for everything card and let you trade ambiguous credits. Or, Jesus Christ, there's a major trading hub and 2 large factions at play here who would have once had the manpower to be their own economy. Jesus, why do we still use bottle caps? The Institute has broken up the major governments of the Commonwealth before, yeah, but despite that, nobody thought about finding a way to make it so we don't have to carry 30 pounds of metal everywhere we go. As we'll soon discuss, it would also be in the Institute's favor to find a lighter, more portable trading medium. Fallout 4 takes place not quite in the same place as Fallout 3, but they overlap just enough that one of the Institute's crowning achievements, a synthetic human, can be found in Rivet City at the Washington Naval Yard some 400 miles from Boston, 10 years before Fallout 4. This is, for all intents and purposes, Bethesda's Fallout 2, and I get it's only been 10 years since 3, but 4 is set in a place that only got hit with a single nuclear warhead. The black rains that ate away the flora of the world, untouched by nuclear devastation, have done little to hinder the Commonwealth. And despite that, it's only about as civilized as the most nuclear hellhole in all of the US. It is implied that the Institute is to blame. The researchers who have lived underneath the Commonwealth Institute of Technology since just after the Great War. They've invented a great number of new, fabulous inventions, so advanced that they don't think anyone outside would be able to understand how valuable they are. After all, they've been inventing and innovating for nearly 200 years, without much interaction with the outside world. This is just the think tank. Yep, the Institute is pretty much just the think tank coated in some 2001 A Space Odyssey paint to make it look less obvious. They haven't dumped their brains into jars or forced themselves to work on strange new innovations for centuries, and the amount of sexual tension can be best described as average, at best. The Institute also accepts bottle caps with no intermediary currency, so it really makes it feel like they deliberately don't want a secondary currency. The bottle cap is the currency. It's iconic. It's not Fallout without it. The Institute's crowning achievement is the Synth, a replicated man that they can swoop up into the wasteland at a moment's notice to kill and replace the human populace. It's implied that synths are replacing regular humans that could potentially blow the whistle on the Institute, and that the synths are effectively identical but have dropped the notion of telling folks about it all, effectively pacifying any chance of the outside world learning about them, but this is never explicitly said. What the Institute is clear on, though, is that synths are the future. The Institute's various fraternities are still alive and well, and all of them have greatly conflicting ideas as to what synths are for. Are they a workforce? Are they an army? Is this an attempt at improving humanity? The Institute is kidnapping people to use their likeness to build synths, as well as experimenting on humans with FEV to produce people better outfitted to handle the wasteland. But all they've created so far are super mutants, a market already cornered as the master race of the wastes 126 years ago. Yeah, that didn't work out too well for the master, did it? Are synths recon? Are they tools? Are they even sentient? No two scientists in the Institute have the same idea as to what they're for. But they're sure as hell building them. They're technophiles with no direction. They're Big Mountain. In their defense, they're afraid of the outside world as it's unstable and full of pandemonium and chaos. Why is it full of pandemonium and chaos? Well, there are 3 answers. The first is because of super mutants, which the Institute made. The second of which is that the Commonwealth's central government fell years before Fallout 4. A synth killed it. And third, synths. which they made. The thing that kills me the most is that Robert House graduated from CIT at 22 years old and founded the largest robotics companies in the world. He had a robot army all of his own pre-war, in a fraction of the time it took the Institute to make Mark III synths. Granted, this and this don't look alike, but you'll give it the respect it asks for once you know it's got a Gatling laser, a submachine gun, a missile launcher, and an M79 inside of it. Boom. Done. No need to do whatever the hell the Institute is doing. This lack of focus makes it hard to talk about Fallout 4 thematically. It's really obvious that somebody either read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep or just watched Blade Runner, and from there they wanted a similar story in Fallout 4. So as a result, there's less to talk about and less new to see in the wasteland above, because the game is focused on this body-snatching sci-fi plot going on underground. But it's so esoteric that the only faction that has any real aversion to the Institute beyond they're scary and technologically advanced is the Railroad, who sees synths as just as sentient as human beings, as capable of ambitions, dreams, and free will as you or me. And they want to help them shed their replicator-like programming to become regular, everyday people. The Brotherhood of Steel, once again xenophobic and this time rolling into a massive airship, hate the Institute because they're just that advanced. The Minutemen want the Institute destroyed because... The Minutemen want the Institute destroyed because... looks like another settlement needs our help, Nate. This plot is nonsensical. It's virtually a similar plot to New Vegas. It's a sort of power grab between factions, but the reasons for the four factions to be fighting each other are very loosely defined. For the Minutemen, it's just a retaliation. They're against the Institute if the Institute is against you. You can team up with the Brotherhood of Steel or the Railroad in either case, and as long as neither is hostile towards you, they don't need to be attacked, leaving just destroying the Institute. If you are on the side of the Institute, both the Brotherhood of Steel and the Railroad need to be destroyed. The Minutemen can be ignored. This should make the Minutemen akin to Yes Men in that they remain open as an option when you fail everything else. But it is still possible to lock yourself out of the Minutemen and, indeed, finishing the game if you play one of the other DLCs. This isn't even the most egregious decision in the DLCs, but we're not there yet. Somehow. Oh, and guess which giant, communist-hating, nuke-chucking robot is back? Yeah, they couldn't fucking resist, could they? If you side with the Brotherhood of Steel, you have to assist in repairing Liberty Prime, who will then parade through the streets hating communists and chucking nukes, stopping at a war memorial to salute fallen troops before killing indiscriminately again. Without the Enclave to take the brunt of Liberty Prime's aimless, canned, communist-hating and nuke-chucking, the robot feels even less like satire and more like honest, twisted patriotism. It's really sickening in a really frustrating way, more so than the giant, communist-hating, nuke-chucking robot was in the first place. Oh, speaking of nukes, the one nuke that hits the Commonwealth is to the southwest, creating an irradiated bed of decay known as the Glowing Sea. It's still radioactive 210 years later, enough to potentially kill a player in just 2 minutes. This is the single most irradiated area caused by a single warhead in the entire series. Which begs two questions. Why didn't the Capital Wasteland look like this? That was absolutely decimated by hundreds of nukes, and at worst it's a little green and the Geiger counter goes off around stuff like water or the White House's giant glowing crater. But not when you're just idly standing by. And two, why did they drop such a dirty bomb on Boston? Why not downtown Boston at that? Why would the Chinese government seek to keep an area like Boston, a densely populated city home to many pre-revolutionary monuments, mostly intact, even if the bomb they dropped had missed? Just a reminder that the bombs, plural bombs, that hit Chicago looked like this. Las Vegas was targeted by almost 100 warheads, even if not all of them were nuclear. Boston just gets a single bomb, and the most it did to downtown Boston was make it a little green and stormy when the winds blow in a northeast direction. The intense radiation in the area can't be explained with the addition of additional ground burst bombs. Todd specifically stated just a single bomb hit Boston. There is some faint justification that a nuclear power plant was in the area that was hit. The fallout from a nuke would have dissipated in the last 210 years. It's why places like Nagasaki could become hospitable again within our lifetimes. But radiation from a power plant can stay in the ground for thousands of years, which is why Chernobyl is still just as dangerous today as it was the year after it melted down. But regardless, China went easy on Boston. You even meet the man who launched the warheads. I can accept that more than one hit the Commonwealth, but Todd and Bethesda make it clear it was a single nuke. Well, we can add that to the Fallout 4 contradicts itself jar. Fallout 4 is, to date, the single best-selling mainline Fallout ever. That should be no surprise, for better or for worse. This is the game that was hot off the heels of Skyrim. It's much more FPS-like, which brings in FPS fans that would otherwise not touch an RPG. And the game's romanceable companions and the ambiguous nature of the Institute's goals would appeal greatly to fanfiction writers. On top of that, Bethesda brought mods to consoles with Fallout 4, effectively negating the point of them doing any DLC to answer fan requests or patches to solve isolated issues. Nuka World adds a raider questline with no end goal, and the alternative is to slog through a terrible gauntlet of traps and kill every single raider in the park if you want to be a good guy. Every single raider. Vault-Tec Workshop is a very short questline that more or less is just a smidgen of the mobile game Fallout Shelter transplanted into the AAA Fallout series. And I won't be covering Fallout Shelter in this video. What do you want me to say about this? Contraption Workshop has no plot and it's just workshop stuff. Wasteland Workshop is just workshop stuff. Automation lets you build and customize robots for your settlement in case you want to give Codsworth legs and laugh at him. Point and laugh, everybody. And Far Harbor. Oh boy, Far Harbor. But first, an aside. In the DOS titles, there are no generic raiders. They break up into factions with their own unique rituals and goals. In Bethesda games, raiders are a single large faction, arguably the largest in each region they're in, all somehow united behind pillaging and burning, which makes no sense as there should be raider infighting. Nuka World adds in factions of raiders, and the base game has things like the Forged, but they only spread into the Commonwealth if you take over settlements for them, and the Forged kind of just stay in one area for the entire game. Break these guys up into like 4 teams: gun fetishists, drug addicts, sociopaths, and hoarders. Or just use the Nuka World factions in your next sequel game. Thank you. You have the Gunners, and they do infight with raiders, but the raiders group is so large they have dozens of settlements that don't compete with each other. They look out for each other quite often and write letters. They even have their own line of power armor. The only other faction that has post-war power armor is the Enclave. It's ridiculous. So, what do people like most about Fallout? The critiques on consumerism and warfare? The innovative means to approach situations in non-combative ways? The ability to step into the shoes of someone lost in a dangerous world? But how can we distill all of that? Oh, I've got it! Moral ambiguity! And Fa Haba has buckets full of moral ambiguity. Kasumi Nakano has convinced herself she's a synth and is looking to join a synth commune in Bar Harbor in Maine. On the harbor, the local fishermen have a problem. Fog blanketing the island has made traversing it and fishing a pain. Bonus points, the fog is radioactive, and the result of the Church of Adam blanketing the land to turn it into a holy place. You know the Church of Adam, these weirdos from Fallout 3? Yeah, they're a dangerous cult now. And in the middle, that synth refuge, Acadia. The founder of Acadia, Dima, has been playing both sides, giving the people of Far Harbor fog condensers to keep themselves safe, while giving the Church of Adam a place to stay. As tensions between the two factions rose, Dima ended up killing Captain Avery and replacing her with a synth to curb tensions. Dima then deleted his memory of ever doing so. He's doing his best, but occasionally makes hypocritical decisions and lets anxiety get the best of him. If you opt to keep Dima secret, you have to kill the Church of Adam's High Confessor, keeping the status quo the same. If you request he turn himself in, he will confess to Far Harbor, but will end up being killed and Acadia will be stormed and destroyed. If you kill off Acadia with the help of the Brotherhood of Steel, Dima will express remorse at having to fight you and thus will send Nick Valentine into a deep depression as he's not just another early synth model, the two are brothers. If you destroy either faction, Dima will be upset with the player. Either way, there is no happy ending for the people of Far Harbor. The closest you can get is being able to send Kasumi home, keep Acadia safe by doing side quests for the people of Far Harbor, but then the Church of Adam still exists, and that fog is just going to keep getting worse. This is different from New Vegas' example. as while there is not one happy ending in New Vegas, many factions and lives are made better through the player's actions. In Far Harbor, siding with the church dooms the people of Far Harbor to abandon their fishery as it's no longer hospitable. If you side with Dima, the issue with the radioactive fog isn't resolved. If you request Dima does the right thing, he dies and Acadia is destroyed. And if you side with the fishers of Far Harbor, both the Synth Refuge and the church are destroyed, leaving only them happy. This is a bleak ending. And along the way, the player deals with pretty much just Jarces from Skyrim and a weird VR tower defense computer hacking minigame, and also a murder mystery with some robots. That's a little fun. Oh, and the revelation that all of this means nothing. It's not enough that your spouse is dead and your son's now a 60-year-old cancer patient that lacks empathy and compassion. Dima suggests that the player might be a synth too, and Nate nor Nora make a very solid case for themselves that they're flesh and blood. The player might be a synth all along, their quest to find their son not only pointless as they had found him with days left to live, but even more so as they were never their father to begin with. All of this for naught. How would it feel if your quest in the game you're playing was entirely pointless, if it ends with your death, with the revelation that you aren't even yourself, your quest meaningless? It makes sense that they're a synth if the pre-war gameplay scenario is simply a fabricated memory, their actual memory only beginning inside Vault 111. But at the same time, it's dumb. It's stupid. It's so many loopholes stapled together that simply should not exist. And rightly so, Bethesda dropped this accusation as soon as they wrote it. Demon never brings it up again. Whether or not you're human is left entirely ambiguous, though not up to the player's discretion. If it was up to the player's discretion, all of them would decide that you are not a synth, because that would be stupid. Of course, synthetic humans roaming the wasteland is a big change for Fallout. A lot of things changed that one edition. Pretty much the entire series has a new direction. We're going backwards. Announced a year or so after DLC for Fallout 4 ended, a new Fallout game was revealed. This one seemed like a prequel. The Pip-Boy scene in the trailer was designed not unlike the one in Fallouts 1 and 2. And Fallout 76? I need to talk about 72 more Fallouts? No, that's not the game number. That's the vault number. It takes place at Vault 76. What was Vault 76's terrible experiment? It just opened 25 years after the bombs fell to reclaim Appalachia. Say, we don't hear from Appalachia in the years since, do we? Oh. In theory, a multiplayer Fallout isn't a bad idea. If you can unite a group of players behind a single common goal, it'd work fabulously. Say, me and 3 or 5 friends could be a single small faction working to push out enemies and make a name for ourselves. That'd be fine. Drop in, drop out multiplayer, one common goal. The game would need to have a very unambiguous objective. This is what makes PvP in titles like Destiny appealing. In PvP games, my entire team is dedicated to winning, and in titles like Left 4 Dead, we're working together to complete objectives and make it to the end of the campaign. We're not given a vague, ambiguous task like, quote, rebuild America, unquote. Yeah, that's strike one. There's not much incentive to actually play any of the main campaigns in this state. The kleptomaniac gameplay from the rest of the series, paired with the little motivation to engage with the main campaign, and a breadth of side activities mean most people just play the side stuff. Go exploring, build fortresses full of microtransactions and memes wherever they see fit, and you're often not near other players if queuing solo. But hey, need a boost? Grab some power armor. Never mind the fact that it only ran for like 15 minutes off a fusion core in Fallout 4 because their internal generators failed, and the fusion cores have all expired and thus there's no excuse here. Get going. Slowly. Wastefully. Heavily. But at least you won't get scratched up too bad with this on, when you can afford to keep it running. But what is the objective, you ask? Well, when Vault 76 opens, there is no life. Appalachia went unscathed in the bombings, with the only real issue being the water's a little radioactive and there's mutant horrors out and about. But that's it. This is despite the fact that Appalachia looks almost exactly like the Boston Commonwealth in many places, especially after the Wastelanders update added NPC settlements. 25 years, 210 years, it makes no difference. Years is just a number. 1995 and 1910, those are both years. Toy Story and Roosevelt in Africa, they're both movies. Taft and Bush Sr., practically brothers. But no, this isn't the result of the bombs. Instead, some plague swept Appalachia and turned the people into nearly completely feral ghoul-like enemies called Scorched. What's spreading the plague? Scorch beasts, giant dragons, giant bats with imposing usage of Thum, giant bats with imposing sonic screeches and plague crop dusting powers. Who's to blame for the Scorch beasts? I mean, go ahead. Take a guess. I'm serious. Out loud right now, say who you think caused the Scorch beasts to appear in Appalachia. Oh, was that? The Enclave made the Scorch beasts? Oh, whoopee fucking woohoo, you're completely right. What are they doing in West Virginia? Well, after they lost contact with the oil rig off the coast of California, the fascist scum of the federal government who had bunkered down in Whitetail Resort started their own enclave with the exact same imagery. They wanted to purge the mutant scum from the wasteland. The mutant scum they made. The super mutants are the result of dumping FEV into the water in Huntersville pre-war. The Snallygaster and Grafton monster are FEV experiments on humans. The Mothman is actually just Mothman. The Flatwoods monster is aliens? What the fuck? So they made giant mutant bats. Not to actually solve those problems, that's actually unrelated. They were trying to raise the alert level to DEFCON 1 so they could nuke China. For you see, China nuked America first. We didn't fire until it was too late. That doesn't matter. The Great War began and ended in 2 hours. Who shot first is as important as to know who made the baseball thrown on the last pitch of the World Series. And it makes America look innocent. And America wasn't fucking innocent. They rounded up Chinese citizens and locked them in internment camps. They experimented on human beings both psychologically and physically. And oh, by the way, aside from the imagery, I'm talking about our real goddamn America. But the Scorch Beasts, much like every other great evil a bumbling villain unleashes, gets out of hand and tears apart the world. They're still only stuck in Appalachia for the time being, but if they can breed, they'll wipe out the rest of the US and wipe out any would-be wastelanders. And boy howdy, will these things breed. The Scorched harbor their plague, but also spread it thanks to green fungal-like minerals growing inside of them. Ultracite. Ultracite is capable of operating machinery for decades. It harbors nearly infinite energy, but exposure to it turned regular cattle into Brahmin in mere hours, as opposed to the decades it seemingly took before. See, children, radiation and FEV aren't the real cause of all the wasteland horrors. It was Ultracite all along, in every Fallout game now. God damn it, why is Bethesda like this? FEV and radiation were more than enough justification for how things got the way they were. Even after 25 years, we didn't need super uranium. This shit is almost exactly what iridium in Borderlands 2 and 3 is. Iridium's a rare mineral, required for late-game crafting and obtainable through late-game encounters. It rapidly mutates the land around it and brings people with it too. It slags incredibly easily, and in general, it's going to be used as a means to justify any amount of crazy shit they do in the sequel. There will no doubt be Scorch Beasts or some crazy Wendigo Colossus-like monstrosity in Fallout 5, and Ultracite will probably be partially to blame, despite it never being referenced in a prior Fallout game and being lost to time for probably 200 years. As the player explores Appalachia, they come across various former factions. The Responders are pretty much the Desert Rangers from 1988's Wasteland. They're first responders, former firefighters, and medics, looking out for the people around them. A neighborhood watch, without the racism. The Raiders faction is represented by a single perky punk Miss Nanny with the brain of a fallen raider, as there were no just generic raiders in the game until April 2020. The Free States are hardcore libertarians who built their own bunkers to avoid the fallout. That didn't work. The Brotherhood of Steel are here for some reason. And the Enclave are also here for some reason. The new factions are alright, they make sense, they have clear goals and no real follow-through, but it's the thought that counts. While learning about the Free States, we venture into the Mire, home to my second least favorite revelation in all of Fallout. So a while back, I described the Gek as being a set of instructions, a basic matter replicator, a fusion reactor, some seeds, some info. Fallout 3 retconned this into being the basic model, as there's a more advanced one. You see, that's why Fallout 3's Gek could remove radiation from water. And Fallout 76 features the dumbest, or smartest, or the most ridiculous Gek of all. Vault 94 was a hippie commune who made contact with the surface a year after the bombs fell. The Free States, dealing with a refugee issue overpopulating Harper's Ferry, assumed the free spirits from Vault 94 were leading the town into a trap, and their ambassadors killed everyone inside the vault. They thought the Gek was, some sort of mind control weapon of sorts, creating their easygoing dispositions, so they fired on it. The Gek rapidly mutated, fell out of control, and exploded foliage into Appalachia for miles around, creating the mire, choking out West Virginian nature with vines and leaving behind a dense swamp now home to mutants, giant sloths, and mutant salamanders. Does this remind you of anything? Does this remind you of the crate from Cat in the Hat? Because to me, this is the crate from Cat in the Hat, the movie. It can literally recombobulate matter around it to suit whatever it wants and produces surreal landscapes in its wake. It's the crate from the Cat in the Hat movie. The Gek can just be a luxurious piece of agricultural tech, but according to Fallout 3, it also can literally collapse all matter around it and reshape that matter depending on its user's actions. And here we get to see it do just that. The resource for rebuilding civilization after the bomb? Hell yeah, it is. Don't just make it mad, or else you'll be living in an illustrious West Virginian swamp. The most damning thing about it is I can't even show you the Gek in action. They removed the vault from the game. I can still walk up to it. I can still tap on the door. I can't go in. And the update that removed it was Wastelanders, which added the NPCs. But the mire still stands. And this obscene retcon of what was a pretty simple device is the more damning part of Fallout 76's. Fallout is a lot of things. It's anti-consumerist, it's anti-nationalist, but most of all, Fallout is anti-war. The nukes are not a good thing. We don't talk about radiation in Fallout as the stuff superheroes are made out of. It makes monsters. It's a beacon of everything wrong with modern warfare. Fallout 76 requires you to nuke a large chunk of the map as part of its campaign, with the implication that the nukes will shatter the old mine shafts, pinning the Scorch Beasts under rubble, killing them. It's been 2 years, both in-game and out, and the Scorch Beasts still fly about, offering high-tier, high-level loot for players who walk away from the fights a winner. The nukes do not do their job, but still you must fire one. And all players on the map are warned about the nukes going off. They have to run if they're in the blast zone, and everyone can see the explosion as long as they have a clean sightline and are outside. Once it's over, run into the blast zone to fight a Scorch Beast, as well as new, high-level mutant horrors, and collect a ton of legendary loot. Nukes have been a means to an end, in pretty much every other Fallout game before this. But 76 is the only game who makes the nukes a spectacle through and through. The trailer sums it up perfectly. People who would have been alive to know the nukes destroyed their world, gathered around to watch one destroy it all over again, all in the name of stopping a beast that is not stopped, all for a settlement that is doomed to fail. Appalachia would be somewhere in the other Fallouts if the quest we set out on in 76 succeeded. They aren't. I get it. Fallout 76 isn't about the lore. It's about the experience of playing Fallout with friends. And it's not even really good at that. But all of this does a great job at explaining just how Bethesda treats the world of Fallout. They either don't care about the intricate cautionary tale of fascism and greed buried underneath its sci-fi movie veneer, or if they do care, they don't show it in the right ways, or maybe they can't show it. Elements of Interplay's games show up at complete random, as a means to sell merchandise or simply to avoid the headache of coming up with the web of interactions that make a new faction tick. Vault Boy merchandise, Power Armor Funko Pops, tie-in beverages, and patriotic flair, all brandishing the Fallout name, exist left, right, and center. They have since about 2010, but have exploded in the last 5 years. My nightshirts since 2017 have been a pair of Fallout t-shirts my late father bought for me after I started getting into New Vegas. I stopped wearing them day to day when I became disenchanted with Fallout 4, but not enough to throw them out. He went through the trouble to pick me up every piece of small, cheap Fallout merchandise he saw, because he knew deep down I really loved this world, and just as much wanted to love these games. I cannot thank him enough for the action figure, the lunchboxes. He even chipped in to get me this Pip-Boy model. Thank you so much, Dad. I hope I've made you proud, in some way. But the fact that I own all this merchandise of a franchise so anti-consumerist shows something truly troubling with how Bethesda or ZeniMax treats the series. When Amazon, the corporation home to the richest man in the world, announced they are producing a series based on Fallout, I immediately lost faith in it. Hadn't seen any trailers, didn't even know who was involved, other than Amazon, and that was all I needed to know. Fallout has an important message about our world today, in case I hadn't made it clear, and that stems from the issues we're facing as a nation right now. And have been. We're overzealous in our own exceptionalism, even when it's not earned or deserved. And we get that way by dragging other nations down. We don't want to lift up the Middle East. We destroy their monuments, terrorize their people. And all of that for what? Some oil, a non-renewable resource we're also mining out of Alaska, fracking out of every other state, pumping across Native American reservations, their own land, scarred with monuments to white supremacy built in the past 100 years to intimidate people of color, even though they're indigenous to the region. We built an economy so power-hungry, so dependent on war, that the office of president is an office of war crimes, forced into being the general for the world's largest military-industrial complex. So massive and so powerful, it's convinced itself and us that it needs more money, that the way of the future is to siphon the funds for healthcare, for education, for sensible laws and law enforcement into buying better guns and better bombs to terrorize some other country. We built an economy so power-hungry, so dependent on bloodshed, that the people who tell us our taillight is busted and should be fixed need to carry a fully automatic carbine, a shotgun, chemical weapons, 2 pistols, and riot shields with them at all times. All built on the backs of slave patrols that used to roam the country turning in black people for bounties, even after slavery was outlawed. A nation so covertly fascist that its crowning achievement in film is a racist tirade that brought back the largest white supremacy group in the world, so strongly that they are still out in the open 100 years later, burning crosses and lynching innocent black lives. The world of Fallout is us, a ghost Christmas future of what we can and will be on our current path. War never changes, but men do, through the paths they walk, and we have the opportunity to turn back around and say enough is enough and tear down these oppressive devices and make way for peace in our world. And it's through media like Fallout that people can learn about these sorts of systems and how they damage us. But when the message is this cloudy, this obfuscated through retcons, wishy-washy writing, and merchandising, it's hard to find the right words. It's hard to take it seriously. It's hard to make the message heard. Oh, what a shame. Things were better in the past. New things terrify me. Fallout never should have gone past the days of Fallout 2, the best Fallout game ever made. No, actually, Fallout 2 has plenty of its own problems. The game is very open about slavery and prostitution. It drops the R slur numerous times. Fun fact, it's dropped only once in Fallout 4, and the guy who says it is voiced by the guy who wrote Fallout 4's script. That's a yikes from me. And in general, Fallout 2 feels like a mature rated product from the early internet days. But it's more than that. Fallout 2 is a very self-aware title, and that often works against its messages. Your reward for defeating the Enclave is a Fallout 2 strategy guide. A random encounter involves a group of the first game's forum goers harassing a known forum troll. A bridge keeper will ask you what the minimum level requirement for quick pockets is, or which character from the first game survived into the second. Many of the side quests amount to, man, this would have been helpful in the first game. And many of the higher tier weapons are things like the P90, the G11, the Pancor Jackhammer. All weapons from the 1980s or simply just never existed. It's a little more Evil Dead than Mad Max, and tonally is just all over the place. So then Fallout 1 is the best Fallout game ever, right? I mean, in terms of sheer quality, maybe? If you like completing 2 objectives and walking away, sure. I don't know about you, though. I would like to have a little more than 2 objectives. You could follow leads about where you were given to experience more places, but on repeat playthroughs, it's just easier to walk to the military base, blow it up, walk to the cathedral, blow that up, and then go home. So the Fallout Bible is the best then. It's from the writers of the writer. Just the one. And it's the guy I haven't mentioned by name yet in this video because he's been accused of sexual misconduct towards several women. I mean, he was mostly just answering forum questions throughout the Fallout Bible's 1-year run, and it's loaded with contradictions and clarifications. It's not really a cohesive chronology of sorts. So Fallout New Vegas is the one true Fallout. I mean, one game can't be an entire series. We need more games willing to express just how hellish the world was, how the nuclear holocaust witnessed in 2077 was a deserved end for a fascist America, and the world they ruined, but also an opportunity to reinvent the world and learn from past mistakes. And speaking of new games learning from past mistakes, a number of titles have sprung up from Fallout's apparent downfall. The best known of these is probably The Outer Worlds. Directed by Tim Kaine and Leonard Boyarsky, the directors of Fallout 1, and developed by Obsidian, the folks behind New Vegas, The Outer Worlds has a lot of New Vegas in its blood. While the game doesn't support a pacifist run, most major quests can be solved in numerous ways. The Outer Worlds has combat, and it sure does have gunplay, but they're not quite as in-depth to put them on par with the non-combative gameplay. Also because Obsidian isn't made out of money. There's just 3 ammo types in this game, which feels a little weak. But there's also melee weapons, stealth, and, of course, passing a myriad of skill checks. The Outer Worlds is set in the year 2355. After William McKinley failed to be assassinated, nobody ever bothered to break up the business trusts, and megacorporations took over the galaxy as soon as they could, with the Halcyon system being consumed by brands in short order. By the time that the player wakes up, the worlds of the Halcyon system have been completely decimated by the companies, and your brand affiliation has pretty much usurped your personality, with many people comparing using another company's products with treason. You have to rent out graves from these companies. Their actions have converted the flora and fauna into easily exploitable resources. And man, oh man, I wonder if all this sardonic brand image rhetoric comes from somewhere. The Outer Worlds is a fine game, and while it doesn't come close to touching on the world or themes of consumerism and war as Fallout did, it's a fantastic start for Obsidian, and its eclectic characters and actual frame rate have made it a cult classic with New Vegas' fans. And even people who've never played a Fallout game. But this isn't the only fragment of the Fallout of yore out there. I mean, Borderlands 1 is inspired by Fallout to some extent, but you can't look at this and see much of a lineage. We can count straws for days and days, but what about a game that's actually written by some of 2 or New Vegas' writers? There's gotta be one of those, right? Yes. And, buckle up. Because we kinda have to go back to the very beginning of this video. Like 2.5 hours ago, probably at this point, we touched on Wasteland, the spiritual precursor to Fallout. Came out in 1988. It got a sequel 26 years later. In 2014, Wasteland 2 came out, featuring a handful of the writing team from 2 and New Vegas. Wasteland 2 is more tactical RPG with a bit of XCOM, a bit of Fallout, and a bit of the first Wasteland in there than a regular CRPG. The game is set in 2102, the exact same year as Fallout 76 by some freak coincidence, and 15 years after the first Wasteland. The Desert Rangers are shocked to learn about synthetic humans. This came out a year before Fallout 4 used that exact same plot point. That's weird. These synthetic humans are the remains of the pre-war AI that caused Wasteland 1, and the Rangers set out to find the source of the AI threat and eliminate it. This one is definitely just a sequel to Wasteland, but if you thought Fallout 2 was best as a turn-based RPG, here's a turn-based RPG. There's also a third one, but the fact that Fallout's apparent floundering was enough to revitalize Wasteland is more or less a testament to how the series is perceived by its creators. And also, because I have nowhere else to mention this, Wasteland 3 has a giant statue of Ronald Reagan and a cult that worships Ronald Reagan. I don't know if that's clever or not. So, what exactly is the issue with Fallout then? Well, for starters, the series' roots are in how American exceptionalism and rampant nationalism are both a catalyst for fascism and also end up taking down the rest of the world. America wants to be number one, and rather than investing in its people, giving us better wages, easier living, and smoothing out the incredible disparity between billionaires who own more wealth than half of the Earth's population, and the 500,000 homeless Americans, and the approximately 30 million Americans living in poverty, we'd rather just gun down other nations to steal from them. That's not healthy or sustainable. There's still some inklings of this mentality in Fallout now, but it's buried under so much ambiguous Americana. Is Liberty Prime satire for how grossly inefficient and wasteful our economy is, or is he just supposed to be this really cool spectacle of communism hating and nuke chucking? Is power armor a sign that American soldiers are being turned into war machines who will accidentally or inadvertently slaughter innocent lives? Or is this cool walking tank you get before you hit level 3 to spar with a Deathclaw? Are nukes a troubling sign of an overly combative, bloodthirsty nation ready to take down the rest of the world if they don't get their way? Or are they a tool, a bargaining chip to push Caesar's Legion or some bats out of the way? This indecisive Americana has a purpose. If Fallout was strictly anti-nationalist, they couldn't sell patriotic weapon skins, they couldn't stick the NCR on a shirt or sell you an Enclave flag. If Fallout was strictly pro-nationalist, then longtime fans would accuse them of selling out and move on. So there's these really hidden little bits in there to make you go, oh yeah, pre-war America was bad. But then they can turn around and sell, ooh, damn, is that a card deck with a platinum chip packed in? Don't look, don't mind me, I'm just gonna, oh wait, no, I spent 20 bucks making this video because I had to buy Fallout 76. We'll take that out of there, but if this video does pretty good, then, I'll bookmark this. There we go. Likewise, anti-consumerist media in a pro-consumerist world just doesn't go well together. I get it, companies have to make money, so they'll load up Fallout, or really anything, with iconic characters and logos and things that make you go, I want that in real life. And when a piece of media can't or doesn't do that, it makes us feel weird. What do you mean there's no Up action figures? What if I want a Howard Wakefield garage attic playset for little Jimmy? And if something criticizes consumerism but I had to pay for it, then that feels cheap. From a business standpoint, I get the minimalization of these elements in Fallout, but then it isn't Fallout anymore. It's just a fun sci-fi FPS with RPG elements, sure. But Fallout is more than just a couple buzzwords trying to be Far Cry built on a game engine based on a 2009 game built on a 2002 engine. Jesus, Bethesda. I think ultimately, while merchandise is cool and all, I'd rather see an emphasis put towards making a stronger game. But what does that mean? Fallout New Vegas' best elements are those that aren't telling a sci-fi B-movie story, but instead just the story of people. Fallout doesn't need to be all robots and mutant horrors to be Fallout. Fallout 1 had a number of those elements, but that had set the stage for the rest of the series, so of course it does. Also, don't be afraid to take some risks. Advance the world a little bit. Maybe we can have a game whose currency is coins once more. Maybe a faction that managed to produce pharmaceuticals or clean, purified water, and have just enough pull on the economy that they can release a coin of etched aluminum and just go, 30 of these buy a stim pack, 5 of these buy a bottle of water. And over 20 years or so, that just becomes the norm. Maybe a faction holed up in an old museum crushes pennies or bottle caps into those egg-shaped token thingies, and those are the currency. Maybe we can just get a faction that offers a bill-like dollar, like New Vegas' NCR. Our factions need clear dividing lines. Even though Fiends, Great Khans, and Powder Gangers are all raiders of a sort in New Vegas, they're clearly different factions. Likewise, just having one big raider faction with their own class of armor just makes me think that these drug addicts are more organized and work together better than all the other East Coast factions combined. And in Fallout 4, that was pretty dang true. As for everyone else, each of the factions should have an idea as to what they're willing to do with the point of the game. After all, it's a given that every Fallout title is some sort of war. It's the first word said in every game, more or less. And it should be unambiguous that the issues in this game are spurred by the sociopathic apathy of pre-war America. It has to come from somewhere, and it has to lead somewhere, and it needs to lead to a message. As for approaching the game from a gestalt standpoint, I'm sorry, this is me way more subjective than anything else, but I'd very much prefer skills to come back. Want your perk-centric gameplay? Sure, then make the skills organically grow as I play. Is it a little Elder Scrollsy? I mean a little, but you can't wield a gun in Skyrim. Okay, what? Skills start at 0, plus a bit of your special stats, and level up to 300 as you play, with the jump from 100 to 200 being much slower and only really offering bonuses to your numbers. If you fight with guns, your gun stat increases. Use medkits or soft drinks, your medicine and survival skills go up. Hack terminals, mod energy weapons, dig around inside robots. That's your science skill, baby! And with this, I would kill for special to get a return to form as well, with 5 being average. Treating special stats like perk points in 4 and 76 just feels cheap. It makes special feel like an afterthought instead of this powerful atlas that determines how you play your character. Dumping most of my points into strength means I'll be playing a melee-centric character. Agility means I've got a sneaky wastelander in my hands. And charisma means I'm going to be solving my problems with my words. More of this, please. Also, because Bethesda has a weird issue with this, pretty much every Bethesda Fallout allows you to get 10s in every stat. That's pretty much impossible to do in New Vegas, and it's also definitely impossible in 1 and 2. I feel like that's weird. You don't need to make me perfect at everything to make a fun, cool game. Let me be imperfect, and let that dictate how I play the game. And lastly, this is a final, very nitpicky thing. I'm aware, but it'd be cool to get more weapon variety. I love seeing stuff like the Browning High Power and the M1 Garand in Fallout New Vegas, and getting stuff like an M1911 or a Tokarev 9mm would be a cool first step weapon. Definitely cooler than pipe weapons. Oh, and bring back the Plasma Defender, even though it's a Glock, and if it were real, it would look like this, not this. If you saw the length of this video and immediately panicked over it, I don't blame you. Hi, welcome to the TLDR, which is now its own chapter, instead of kind of stapled to another chapter like that other really long video on here. Fallout is a game that documents what our world would look like if America continues down the self-gratifying, greedy path. Fallout in 1997 was a powerful piece of anti-consumerist, anti-nationalist, anti-war media in a time where video games having such big, impactful messages was laughed at. It held this idea that we must not only take care of our world, but ourselves. We couldn't push each other down if we wished to succeed. We could only do better as a world, and a nation, if we came together to cooperate, to settle our disagreements not with guns and bombs, but with words and ideas, on the global stage. Along the way, the demand for the series to keep up with gaming led to a number of its role-playing elements, which were what made the game feel like having to rough it in the apocalyptic desert remains of California, getting stripped down in favor of more FPS elements in a more streamlined game. Likewise, its anti-consumerist and anti-patriot rhetoric was either toned down or muddled with shades of irony and earnestness, which made the series' messages harder to decipher. Bethesda is too wrapped up in making a Far Cry-esque survival game, a fun and loaded sandbox of ideas and concepts ripe for modding, a crafting title with base building mechanics, and a campaign shooter set in a sci-fi B-movie, that a lot of the core themes and ideas in Fallout are getting lost in transmission. It's all beauty with no brain, a stooge taking cues from a trend, and what a shame. These themes are more important than ever. I'd argue they're the most important they've ever been since the series started. As America takes pages from fascist playbooks, as the nation threatens the world with an unchecked viral epidemic, as its current leader refuses to comment on whether he'll accept the results of the election, the series' messages and ideas are integral nowadays. But ZeniMax Media has spent the last decade obfuscating them. They're still there, but just barely. I have a shred of faith that Bethesda can make them relevant, the forefront of the series once more. It's a tiny shred, ready to blow away in the wind. And I'm already gearing myself up for the announcement of the next Fallout to have learned nothing from New Vegas' cult classic status or the mixed reception of Fallouts 4 and 76, and instead simply just become another FPS series. I don't want that to be what it comes to. I don't think that's what anyone wants the series to come to. If Bethesda's all on board to make these sorts of themes and ideas a reality, but it's ZeniMax Media vetoing them, then I guess I have to direct my upset towards them. Fallout is a massive series now. It's hard to find people who don't know about it, but are in the game's target demographic anymore. Even 15 years ago, that was next to impossible. A big series can have these bigger messages, political statements that amount to, we need to actually improve our nation. Just fighting everyone and making that the metric of success isn't working. That's not really a political message unless your entire view of politics is bullying other nations. It's not going to kill the Fallout series. Besides, I don't think most fans actually read the terminals and listen to the tapes. Until I started making this video, I usually didn't. That is, at the heart of it all, what people who care about Fallout's world want from Fallout. If you care for Fallout's world and know a lot of fans of the newer games, maybe help them learn about the web Boyarsky and Kane weaved years ago. If you're a fan of the newer games but don't understand why older fans are upset over more recent titles, I hope this video has been informative. No matter what though, I cannot thank you enough for coming along with me on this journey through the world of Fallout, breaking down its themes and gestalts along the way. I've been trying to write this video since 2017, and now it's longer than all the scripts I wrote from the channel's first 3 months combined. I couldn't have made it this far without people like you. Whether you skimmed through, skipped right to the end, or watched this entire odyssey unfold, I hope it's been worth it in some respect. If this got you interested in exploring Fallout's world, or just thinking critically about themes and gestalts in games, then I'd like to think I did my job. Again, I have to thank you so much for this opportunity, and for opportunities like this. And I hope to see you around.
Far from the earth, far from the sky, we are no other. Out in the dark, a lone speck of light. All our creation, if we're the only thing that matters, then all we'll leave behind, this little dot you'd barely find. Same